Chapter 1695. That was because Lord Go swallowed the dish too fast. Moreover, it was covered by the golden light, so no one could see clearly what that dish was. Only Lord Go knew. The familiar taste, the feeling of the food slowly flowing in his mouth, and the rich aroma that gushed out were all like a message to Lord Go. The dish that entered his mouth was cooked by Bu Fong with a golden recipe. It was not a strange dish. It was sweet and sour ribs. A bowl of sweet and sour ribs made him as happy as an immortal. In that instant, Lord Dog couldn't help but want to let out a distant bark. He had never thought that he would be able to eat a bowl of sweet and sour ribs. The recipe that had been kept in the Temple of Heaven God Time for so long was actually the sweet and sour ribs that he had been longing for. Lord Go's fur was shaking. At this moment, the law of time, which had been dormant for a long time, suddenly soared. Lord Go opened his eyes. His pitch-black fur seemed to have become shiny. The dog's paws had become much longer. But the law of time wound around his paws and turned into many circles, each of which contained an incomparably terrifying aura. Bu Fong exhaled. His arm was old and rotten, like the arm of an old man. After cooking the dish, he directly stored it in the void. The law of time enveloped the dish, which made Bu Fong feel the power of time, even when he went to pick it up himself. However, Bu Fong was fine. He took a deep breath, and the laws of time surged, sweeping across his arm. Instantly, his decaying arm was restored and filled with life force once again. Lord Go had eaten that dish. Now, it should be time for some changes. Bu Fong thought to himself. He looked expectantly in Lord Go's direction. He wanted to see how much Lord Go would recover after eating the dish marked on the golden recipe. Moreover, that dish, the corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. Following the recipe, Bu Fong's final dish was sweet and sour ribs. Even Bu Fong himself did not expect this. Fortunately, it was sweet and sour ribs, which allowed Bu Fong to complete the last step of cooking at the last critical moment. After all, Bu Fong was too familiar with the cooking of sweet and sour ribs. Every step seemed to be engraved in his heart. Boom, boom, boom. Hades Era's life force surged. It was contending against the black energy ball, and it looked like it would be annihilated at any moment. Heaven God Transmigration, on the other hand, was not looking at Hades Era, but at Lord Go in the distance. The changes that were happening to Lord Go's body were what had attracted his attention. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes. That familiar feeling seemed to have returned. Bang! A river of time tore through the chaos space and fell from the sky. Like a rolling river flowing east, it swirled around Lord Go, causing Lord Go's originally weak aura to rise. The digestion of the food made Lord Go's incomplete causality thrown gradually perfect, and it even reached a state of perfection. Lord Go did not transform into a humanoid shadow. He was still in the form of a big black dog. However, a light disk of law appeared over the dog's head, which rotated slowly and cast down a powerful aura. In the blink of an eye, Lord Dog became somewhat holy and experienced. Rumble. The river of time swirled. Lord Dog strode forward with graceful, cat-like steps. Step by step, it was as if he was a devil. He swayed but as he walked out. Heaven God Time, in his prime, had returned. At this moment, the entire chaos space seemed to tremble. Yin Tianyi wept tears of joy as she watched from below. That familiar, powerful aura. It was none other than Heaven God Time at his prime. This was the heavenly time god, who could reverse time with a single thought. Powerful. Too powerful. Boom. An explosion erupted. Hades Era was instantly blown into a cloud of ashes by the black energy ball. However, after a while, Hades Era, who was standing next to Bu Fong, slowly gathered and transformed into Hades Era. As one of the 5 heaven gods, Heaven God Life was the least likely to die. Naturally, he would not be destroyed so easily. The energy of the explosion began to leak out. It turned into mighty ripples of energy that spread in all directions. The Temple of Heaven God Life seemed to be completely destroyed at this moment. Hades Era trembled with pain. However, There was nothing he could do. Heaven God transmigration was simply too powerful. If they did not fully return, they would not have a chance to deal with Heaven God transmigration. In fact, even if they all returned, it would be very difficult for them to win. However, he could pin his hopes on Lord Go. After all, among the 5 heaven gods, Lord Go was the strongest. Lord Dog's strength could be said to be the strongest, even stronger than Old Thief Samsara. Of course, that was before Old Thief transmigration fused with the Soul Demon's arm. Buzz, the ripples of energy spread out. Everything it covered, including the Temple of Heaven God Life, was instantly reduced to ashes by a flick of a sleeve. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. His tail wagged in the air. He raised his exquisite dog paw and lightly touched the ripple. Crack! It was as if it had been frozen. The boiling energy ripples all stopped moving. Lord Go looked at Heaven God transmigration calmly. Do you regret what you have done now? Lord Go stopped the energy ripples and looked at Heaven God transmigration in the distance. Now that he had completely returned, he had the strength and capital to confront Heaven God transmigration. Even though Heaven God Life had fused with the arm, he was not of the same race, and his heart was not so easy to fuse with. Regret. Of course I regret it. I regret that I didn't remember what you had become when I sent you into the transmigration. I should have killed you before you returned. That way, there would have been no more trouble. Heaven God transmigration sneered. Lord Dog shook his head. He slowly opened his mouth, revealing his sharp canine teeth. If that's the case, I'll kill you. It's time for Heaven God transmigration to have a new god to replace him. Lord Ghost said domineeringly. He strode across the void with his elegant cat-like steps. The next moment, Lord Go disappeared from where he was. Buzz, even the void seemed to be shattered by the explosion. Lord Go moved so fast that he appeared in front of Heaven God transmigration in the blink of an eye. The two's laws collided with each other. The battle between heavenly deities was evenly matched, and they were evenly matched. Energy ripples spread out in all directions. Heaven God transmigration tried to use the Soul Demon's arm, but Lord Go blocked it every time. Buzz, Lord Go drew a circle in the void with his paw. The circle flew out and instantly enveloped everything that was crumbling. Wherever the circle passed, all the ruins seemed to be recovering rapidly. The shattered rubble was also recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye, piling up with a crashing sound. It was as if time was flowing backward. Heaven God transmigration's pupils constricted. He moved a great distance away and looked at the circle of light from a distance. The Temple of Heaven God Life, which had been crumbling, was restored at this moment. Even the shattered array formation was still intact. Down below, Hades' era was overjoyed. He did not expect such a drastic change. Oh, my Temple of Heaven God Life is back. Hades' era was pleasantly surprised. Bufong, on the other hand, was staring at the battle with rapt attention. At this moment, Lord Go seemed to be conducting a tutorial on the use of the law of time. Every wisp of time divine power was used by him to a very precise degree. The law of time, Heaven God transmigration said coldly. The true heavenly time god really was just as powerful as him. Back then, if it weren't for that palm heavily injuring the 4 Empyrean gods, his samsara wouldn't have had the chance to pick up the slack and send the other Empyrean gods into the cycle of reincarnation. Although the arm had been transplanted to his own arm, it was still not enough. But it couldn't be fused with strength. There would always be some deviation, and this deviation would cause his strength to increase, but compared to before the fusion, it would only be a little stronger. Lord Go strode like a cat. With every step, there seemed to be time ripples spreading. The aura of time was the flavor of the vast expanse. Heaven God transmigration kept moving sideways, and the law of transmigration fell from behind him. Buzz, the transmigration law instantly rushed out and collided with Lord Go's time law. 2 supreme laws collided. It emitted a soundless fluctuation. The cycle law was devoured by the time law. At the point of impact, the void began to distort. Heaven God transmigration's pupils constricted. Impossible. Heaven God Transmigration never thought that his power of law could not resist a dog who had been exiled for tens of thousands of years. Lord Go continued to draw circles. He slapped the air with his exquisite paw. The circles enveloped Heaven God Transmigration's body. Buzz, Heaven God Transmigration's face twisted. He found that his body seemed to have become distorted. Some parts of his body became like a newborn baby or an old man who had experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was the power of time that was constantly affecting his body. However, he would soon break free. Although the law of time was powerful, it was still very difficult to completely change a Heaven God. However, after a few exchanges, Heaven God Transmigration also sensed that something was wrong. You've become stronger. Heaven God Transmigration was shocked as he dragged the huge arm. Lord Go was very calm. He had indeed become stronger. He was no longer the Heaven God time he used to be. I have to thank you for your transmigration. Without your help, perhaps even if I recovered, my strength would only be the same as before. But now, Lord Go, I have returned in glory, and with the power of sweet and sour ribs. I am no longer someone I could compare with in the past. I have become stronger. Lord Go said lightly. He raised his paw and pointed at Heaven God Transmigration's soul demon arm. That is not yours, so it's useless no matter how you fuse with it. What doesn't suit you is not suitable for you. Forcibly fusing with it will only make your power of law weaker and weaker, and you will not be able to exert more strength. Heaven God Transmigration covered his head with both hands. He was a little confused at the moment. There was always a majestic voice in his mind that was affecting his consciousness. Damn it. Bullshit. I am the strongest. I am the strongest in the chaos space. I am the lord of the chaos space. Heaven God Transmigration's face became very ferocious. Down below, with a spicy strip dangling from his lips, Hades Era looked at the ferocious Heaven God Transmigration and shook his head. What a poor young man. He lacks the most basic self-awareness. Why doesn't he think that the power that can injure 5 Heaven Gods is really that easy to control? Bu Fong, on the other hand, was very calm. He could tell at a glance that Heaven God Transmigration's state was not right. As the supreme law of the chaotic universe, the law of transmigration was very proud. How could it accept the fusion of another power? Perhaps the transplant did not affect him much. However, as time went by, the rejection between the law of transmigration and the soul demon power would become more and more intense. In the end, it might even cause Heaven God Transmigration's body to explode. The consequence of the rejection was an explosion. Bu Fong estimated that the power would be enough to destroy half of the chaos space. After all, a supreme law carried too many things. The collapse of the law of transmigration was no small matter. It would at least cause the chaotic universe to lose billions of years of evolution. The Lord of the Chaos Space. Lord Go sneered. He raised his paw. The small and exquisite dog paws were constantly radiating brilliance in the air. Buzz, the law of time, kept swirling. Soon, it gathered into the shape of a dog's paw. It was a dog's paw condensed from time. Under the influence of the paw, time flowed faster in the surroundings. Let Lord Go give you a hand. Stupid Lord of the Chaos Space. Lord Go said disdainfully. As the dog's paw swung out, the flow of time skyrocketed under this paw. Get lost. Heaven God Transmigration became extremely irritable. He raised his soul demon arm and slapped at the dog's paw. However, like flowing water, the dog's paw flowed into his arm. All of a sudden, Heaven God Transmigration's body froze. Chapter 1696. Sometimes people loved and hated time at the same time. At least at this moment, Heaven God Transmigration detested time. Lord Go's claw had sped up the flow of time and poured it into his soul demon arm. Heaven God Transmigration felt as if his head was about to explode. His eyes turned bloodshot as the rumbling kept ringing in his head. Time passed slowly, causing his body to become more and more illusory. Red lines emerged on his arm, which became more and more ferocious beating like a heart. "What have you done?" Heaven God Transmigration's pupils constricted, and he covered his head with one hand. His pupils were narrowed and filled with pain. It was real pain, and he felt as if his head was about to explode. The deafening voice kept ringing out as if to tempt and abduct him. "Accept me. I can give you strength. Fuse with me, and you will become the true lord of the chaos space. Accept my strength, and no one can stop you." The voice was gentle and magnetic, making Heaven God Transmigration tremble all over. Slash! The law of transmigration went berserk, and the power of sin surged. When the two energies collided, Heaven God Transmigration's body seemed to crack, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Lord Go hovered in midair, walking slowly. With his strength restored, he was supreme. With him around, the whole chaos space seemed to have calmed down a lot. Hades' era soared into the sky and landed at Lord Go's side. "What's wrong with this old thief?" Hades' era was pleased to see Heaven God Transmigration's pained look. His enemy's injury was his pleasure. Bufong clasped his hands behind his back and raised them. In the distance, a rumbling sound came from the ruins. The ground cracked, and with a thud, the Black Turtle constellation walk flew into Bufong's hand. Hades' era's eyelids twitched when he saw the big hole the Black Turtle constellation walk had made. This must be the backlash. How dare he touch the power of a soul demon? What a fool, Bufong said coldly. Lord Go nodded. They had all experienced the evil of the soul demons. The spatial passages leading to the chaotic universe were sealed by them, which prevented the calamity of the soul demons from spreading. If the soul overlords of the 7 great sins of the soul demon universe descended, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering. After all, every great soul overlord was equivalent to a modern-day heaven god. Rumble. Heaven God Transmigration's body began to swell. Obviously, under the catalysis of time, his control over his own strength was becoming weaker and weaker. Once the power exploded, it was very likely that he would die. Of course, the premise was that Heaven God Transmigration was greedy for the soul demon's power. He was, after all, a heaven god. As long as he cut off the soul demon's arm and gave up his power, he could still recover after a long time. However, if he didn't chop off his arm, he would basically die. Would Heaven God Transmigration give up his arm? Bufong and the rest did not know. They squinted at him. The Lord Go had deployed a barrier around Heaven God Transmigration, sealing off all the energy. The explosion of such energy would not destroy the primal chaos. Crack, crack. Cracks began to appear on Heaven God Transmigration's face. "Oh," Bufong and the others focused their eyes. "It has begun," said the Lord Go. The backlash of the energy began to destroy Heaven God Transmigration's body. In the sky, Heaven God Transmigration covered his head with one hand and kept coughing up blood. The terrible power made him extremely uncomfortable. Why? He had been plotting for countless years. Why didn't it work? He had sacrificed so many living beings and devoured so many transmigrating creatures. Why couldn't he succeed? Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were bloodshot. He covered his head with both hands, and his temples bulged. Blood-colored patterns kept covering his body, making him look like a ferocious demon. He's crazy. This old thief. Why is he so obsessed with power? Hades' era covered his mouth with a hand, a look of disbelief on his face. If this goes on, he's really going to die. This is the consequence of greed. Even gods are no exception. The power of soul demons is born because of this. The 7 sins, greed, sloth, arrogance, and so on, are all based on the most primitive emotions and desires of human beings. The Lord Go sighed with emotion. "Give it up," the Lord Go said to Heaven God Transmigration. "The power of soul demons is not something gods can control. It is a repulsive force. Scram." Heaven God Transmigration growled. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept roaring. He was on the verge of tearing his skin apart. Even the gray transmigration seemed to be stained with black, turning it into a very strange color. "I want to become the lord of the primal chaos. I want power." Heaven God, transmigration roared into the sky. Roar! A terrifying aura exploded from his body, as if he was going to destroy everything. Heaven and earth began to tremble at this moment. The Lord Go's eyes grew more and more serious. This lunatic Hades era twitched his mouth. Slash! All of a sudden, the expressions of Bufong and the others changed dramatically. He's really crazy this time, the Lord Go said. Under his solemn gaze, Heaven God Transmigration grinned coldly. He abruptly stretched out his hand and stabbed it into his chest. His chest shattered in an instant, and blood and flesh flew in all directions. A beating heart was plucked out by him, and with a sudden squeeze, the heart was instantly crushed. It turned into a pile of broken flesh and blood. Hee. After the heart was crushed, an invisible force seemed to break free from Heaven God Transmigration's body. It was an extremely bizarre feeling. The gray transmigration grew weaker and weaker. Even the speed of its rotation became much slower. With a slash, the power of the law of transmigration seemed to strip Heaven God Transmigration's body. I want power. Heaven God Transmigration laughed wildly. Hades' era sucked in a cold breath. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. The Lord Go's eyes narrowed, and there was a look of disappointment in them. Idiot. In the end, the three of them could only come to this conclusion. Yin Tianyi was stunned. She never thought that Heaven God Transmigration would choose to strip away the power of the law of transmigration and choose the power of the soul demon. Is this guy's head stuffed with shit? Hades' era was somewhat speechless. Roar! He roared. A slash rang out. There seemed to be an invisible force tearing it apart, and the gray reincarnation was peeled off. With quick reflexes, Bufong stepped forward and soared into the sky. He raised his hand, and the power of the law of transmigration immediately enveloped the stripped transmigration. Heaven God Transmigration covered his face with one hand. Without the power of the law of transmigration, his causality throne began to crumble. In the end, it completely shattered and merged with the chaos space. Under the control of Bufong's transmigration power, the law of transmigration, which had lost its support, slowly merged with the chaos space. Lord Go, I really didn't expect that a Heaven God would choose the power of the soul demon and give up the power of his own origin. Lord Go felt a little lost. He will regret it, Bufong said faintly. After losing the power of the law of transmigration, Heaven God Transmigration was completely controlled by the soul demon arm, and his body had completely fused with the power of the soul demon. Slash, Heaven God Transmigration's aura began to change, becoming stronger and stronger. Good boy. Feel the power. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were scarlet. Like a child, he listened excitedly to the voice in his head. Swoosh! Suddenly, a pair of wings burst open behind him, revealing a transparent membrane that emitted an evil aura. Heaven God Transmigration looked at his own body with an infatuated look. Buzz suddenly, Lord Go disappeared. When he reappeared, he was right next to Heaven God Transmigration and slammed his paw down. Before this, Lord Go dared not to make a move on his own, fearing that the backlash would break out and destroy half of the chaos space. But now, Heaven God Transmigration had chosen to give up the power of the law of transmigration. Such a foolish act had completely angered Lord Go. He had to kill him now before he could completely fuse with the power of the law of transmigration. Hades' era moved as well. Kill him while he's down. He was very familiar with this method. Rumble. Heaven God Transmigration was instantly knocked to the ground by Lord Go and Hades' era. The law of time and the law of life made Heaven God Transmigration howl in pain. Suddenly, the arm began to grow bigger and bigger. For a moment, it seemed to pierce through the chaos space. The huge arm was wrapped in sinful energy. Heaven God Transmigration dragged the huge arm with a ferocious look on his face. This feels so good. Heaven God Transmigration grinned, revealing his sharp teeth. All of a sudden, the law of time abruptly descended. Time seemed to have turned into sharp blades that were about to cut off Heaven God Transmigration's arm. Hades' era and Lord Go attacked together. Puff, puff. Black smoke filled the air. The whole chaos space seemed to have noticed this scene at this moment. Many experts who were fighting were dumbfounded. What happened? At this moment, the experts who had submitted to Heaven God Transmigration felt a binding force leave them. After Heaven God Transmigration abandoned the law of transmigration, the binding force on them disappeared. Everyone was in an uproar. What kind of monster is that? Heaven God Transmigration? That's the disgusting thing we've submitted to. Those who are not of our race must have a different heart. That's a soul demon. He's a sinful creature. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. If Heaven God Transmigration was still a heaven god, they would still submit to him. However, he was no longer a heaven god. A soul demon? They had to kill him. The two sides who were fighting made peace in an instant. The 9 ancient heaven gods sealed by Lord Go were stunned. They could not believe that Heaven God Transmigration was this kind of person. Were they? They had given everything to the heaven god for so many years. But had they all been fed to a dog? Had Heaven God Transmigration's conscience been fed to a dog? Puff! The law of time and the law of life collided. In an instant, the arm was torn apart as if it was about to be separated from Heaven God Transmigration's body. Swoosh! However, just as it was about to be separated, the arm wriggled and suddenly healed. Then, an increasingly terrifying aura burst out of Heaven God Transmigration's body as he woke up. The Lord Go, Hades' era, and the countless creatures in the chaos space, they were all stunned at this moment. All of them felt their hair stand on end. This aura was exactly the same as the aura that had caused chaos in the chaos space. The chaos of the chaos space was about to reappear. Chapter 1697. A terrible aura pervaded the sky. All eyes rested on Heaven God Transmigration. No, this fellow could no longer be called Heaven God Transmigration because he had given up the power of transmigration and chosen the power of the soul demon. He became neither a human nor a ghost, although he had obtained great power. Although he had gained great power, in the eyes of the others, the price was too high. Heaven God Transmigration's subordinates were somewhat dumbfounded and unwilling. They did not expect him to make such a choice. For a moment, they felt a chill in their hearts. When they recalled what Heaven God Transmigration had done, they felt that their hands were stained with sin and blood. Heaven God Transmigration's laughter rang out in the void. Lord Go and Hades' era had joined forces to attack him. However, Heaven God Transmigration had become even stronger, perhaps because he had fused with the power. One punch after another, he almost knocked Lord Go and Hades' era flying away. His power was beyond everyone's expectations. Without the power of the law of transmigration, no other power could repel the power of the soul demon. As a result, Heaven God Transmigration's strength became even more terrifying. He had almost become a great soul overlord. Boom! Many places in the chaos space were shattered, and the experts were thrown into the distance. Lord Go and Hades' era looked very serious. Bufong stood in the distance with his hands clasped behind his back, his brows furrowed. The battle continued, and the sky was dark and gloomy. The experts in the chaos space could not stand Heaven God Transmigration, who had abandoned the law of transmigration. A group of people surrounded him and kept attacking him. Heaven God Transmigration subordinates had also become his opponents, and they all launched attacks at him. Streams of the power of the law rushed into the sky and shook heaven and earth. However, Heaven God Transmigration remained calm, even though he was enveloped by such an attack. He felt that he had reached another level. These people could not even break his defense. Lord Go was still fighting, while Hades' era landed at Bufong's side, panting. "Bufong, young man, this guy is so hard." Hades' era said. His eyes were solemn, as if he was facing a great enemy. The power of the soul demon's arm has fused with Heaven God Transmigration. Although the fusion is not complete, Heaven God transmigration is already very strong now. The characteristics of soul demons are that they are tough and difficult to deal with. Bufang said. He looked up at Heaven God transmigration, who was fighting against tens of thousands of enemies alone. At the very least, in terms of power, his opponent had made the right bet. By abandoning the power of reincarnation, he had obtained even greater power. Heaven God transmigration narrowed his eyes as he felt the power spreading through his arm. He raised his hand. He grabbed a deity emperor by the neck. He opened his mouth, revealing his sharp teeth, and bit down. With a poochy sound, blood splattered everywhere. Everyone went crazy and panicked. Heaven God transmigration had really been assimilated by the soul demon, and now he was no different from a soul demon. It's so delicious. I'm so hungry. Heaven God transmigration's eyes were scarlet. His figure exploded in the sky. Every single move crushed a God King or God Emperor to death. Lord Go moved. He slapped his paw at Heaven God transmigration, knocking him flying away and sending him crashing into the chaos space. Rumble. The whole chaos space seemed to tremble violently. It was that paw that smashed the Heaven God temple, and it exuded the aura of a soul demon. This meant that the soul demons had set their eyes on the chaotic universe. This was not good news for Lord Go and the other Heaven Gods. Rumble. Huge chains of time descended, wrapping around Heaven God transmigration. Heaven God transmigration was trapped on the ground. Lord Go attacked by force, intending to suppress and seal Heaven God transmigration. But he failed. He broke free from the chains of time and burst into pieces. Heaven God transmigration rushed up into the sky. He was becoming less and less human now. Bufang did not stay to watch the show. He had to get ready to attack because he felt that Heaven God transmigration was trying to escape. He wanted to tear the barrier and escape from the chaos space. The chaos space, which he was once proud of, had now become a means to restrain him. However, once he escaped from the primal chaos space, he would truly be like a fish in the ocean. It would be extremely difficult to capture him again. Once he completely recovered his arm and power, he would certainly bring terror and disaster to the universe. Ordinary people did not even dare to think about that. A modern-day Heaven God had fled and was hiding in the dark. If he did not want to be found, no one would be able to find him. Therefore, Bufang felt that he had to capture him. Of course, in fact, Bufang had his eyes on the arm that Heaven God transmigration had fused with. Since it could make Heaven God transmigration's power so strong, it was very likely that it was not as simple as the arm of a great soul overlord. It was even possible that it was the legendary arm of Soul God. He had heard that Soul God was full of malice toward him, so Bufang naturally did not mind roasting this arm. Well, he would roast it like roasting a pig's trotter. Of course, before that, Bufang had to defeat Heaven God transmigration first. If Heaven God transmigration was still Heaven God transmigration, Bufang might find it tricky. But when dealing with soul demons, Bufang had always had a natural advantage. Perhaps even Heaven God transmigration did not expect this advantage. You go first. I'll be right there. Bufang glanced at Hades' Era and said to him. Era gave Bufang a suspicious look, then rushed into the sky. He and Heaven God transmigration began a fight. Meanwhile, Bufang took out Pride Great Soul Overlord's body, which he had obtained a long time ago. Buzzed the dragon bone kitchen knife buzzed. Bufang's eyes narrowed. With a ripping motion, he removed all the bones from Pride Great Soul Overlord's body. Little Hu and Xiaopi lay on Bufang's shoulders and watched curiously. Bufang laid the body flat on the white tiger heaven stove. Bufang's hand shook. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun in his hand, drew an arc in the air, and then slashed down. Clatter, clatter, clatter. The knife's shadow seemed to disappear. In a flash, Bufang's arm seemed to have turned into 1,000 arms. Every time the knife fell, the Soul Overlord's body would be chopped into pieces. It was as if he was chopping beef into pieces. Clatter, clatter, clatter. He chopped up a pile of mincemeat. Then he swung the kitchen knife horizontally from the bottom to the top and fiercely scraped the meat from the bottom. He threw the pile of meat on top of it and continued to chop it down with the knife. He chopped the meat more finely. Little Hu squeaked as if he was curious about what Bufang was going to cook. "Your favorite." Bufang glanced at Little Hu, and the corners of his mouth curved upward slightly. However, this time, he was not going to use beef but soul overlord meat. This time, he was going to let Little Hu spit as much as he wanted. Bufang's eyes lit up, and there was an inexplicable anticipation in his heart. Little Hu's eyes also lit up, and he was also looking forward to it. Xiaopi, who was spitting bubbles, was a little confused. Why are this man and this fox communicating with their eyes? Bufang's movements were very fast and smooth. Even though it was the soul overlord meat, Bufang could clearly capture the flow of energy in it. Moreover, he was able to use the energy reasonably. Soon, the soul overlord's body was turned into a large pile of minced meat by Bufang. The size of each piece of minced meat was very uniform, and the energy distribution was also very balanced. Bufang washed his hands with the spring of life. He began to knead the minced meat. Before long, he had produced many small, round soul overlord meatballs. Little Hu kept jumping on Bufang's shoulder, rubbing his two little paws in front of his chest, as if he was following Bufang's rhythm. Soon, the blue and white porcelain bowl was full of soul overlord meatballs. The enormous energy wrapped around each soul overlord meatball was extremely frightening, even if it was not cooked. Bufang rubbed his fingers. Then, a scarlet flame rose and burned in his hand. With a flick of his finger, the flame jumped into the black turtle constellation wok. The water in the wok was boiling. Bufang hesitated for a moment, then threw all the soul overlord meatballs into the wok. He stirred the meatballs with the Chilean transmigration ladle, his movements neither fast nor slow. The meatballs in the wok were milky white, and crystal clear energy swirled around them. When he fished them out, the meatballs actually floated up into the air. They were transparent like glass beads, glowing brightly. The scarlet divine flame roasted the meatball, burning all the moisture in the meatball. Then, Bufang poured the oil that he had carefully cooked into the wok. This oil was made from the fat of a god-king level spirit beast. He poured the meatballs into the wok. The oil in the wok began to boil, bubbling with white foam. Meatballs were Little Hu's favorite. At this moment, the little fellow was holding Bufang's head tightly, wagging his little tail. He was very excited, and his little eyes were full of joy. He opened his mouth, and saliva kept flowing out. Bufang was amused by his gluttonous appearance. However, the aroma of the meatballs in the wok was really strong. It was a bit like when an egg was fried in the wok. When that aroma rushed into one's nose, it was difficult to suppress. It was as if it flowed in one's blood. Buzz. Bufang's eyes focused. He raised his hand. The power of the law kept gathering. The power of the law and the array. To enhance the power of the soul demon meatballs, the law of destruction was naturally the best choice. By fusing the law of destruction into the soul demon meatballs, coupled with the explosion of the gourmet array, the meatballs were suddenly filled with terrible explosive energy. If one was not careful, they could even cause the meatballs to explode. Of course, it was also a kind of extreme delicacy. "Little Hu, open your mouth," shouted Bufang. Little Hu's eyes lit up as he held Bufang's head. He jumped up and soared into the air. His little claws swam to both sides like a breaststroke, and he soon swam in front of Bufang, looking at Bufang eagerly. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He flicked his finger. Puff! The oil in the wok exploded. One soul demon meatball after another shot out. Little Hu opened his mouth solemnly. Beep, 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 beep. One by one, the meatballs entered her mouth, and her neck bulged up and down unceasingly. Every time he swallowed a soul demon meatball, Little Hu's eyes lit up. In the end, even Little Hu's hair turned scarlet. That was the heaven god's blood surging in his body. Swoosh! The last spinning soul demon meatball shot out of the wok. Little Hu swooped over and swallowed it in one gulp. Then, he fell into Bufang's arms. Narrowing his eyes, he snuggled comfortably. This gluttonous little fellow. She really ate all of them. Bufong could not help but click his tongue. That was the corpse of a great soul overlord, and this little fellow had swallowed it all. On Bufong's shoulder, Xiaopi glanced at Little Hu, rolled his eyes, and seemed somewhat disdainful. Rumble. In the distant sky, Lord Go and Hades' era were entangled with heaven god transmigration. The latter was exerting the power of sin, causing half of the chaos space to turn pitch black. A roar rang out. Heaven god transmigration's arm swelled up. He knocked Lord Go and Hades' era away. Bam! Bam! Lord Go fell to the ground, which kept crumbling. Hades' era, on the other hand, was knocked flying and rolled a few times. The faces of all the people in the chaos space flickered. Even two modern-day heaven gods could not stop this traitorous heaven god transmigration. What should they do? If they let this fellow escape, all the secrets of the chaos space would be exposed to the soul demons. It would be a disaster for the chaotic universe. When that happened, heaven god transmigration would return with an army of soul demons, and the chaos space would be powerless to resist. Heaven god transmigration's body was crumbling slightly. This was the backlash of the arm fusion. However, he was very excited now. He panted. The soul demon raised his arm and tore the void. The void was suddenly torn apart, and the stable space in the primal chaos was forcibly torn open to reveal a passage. Buzz, heaven god transmigration, stared at the passage, his pupils constricting. He stepped into it expectantly. Just you wait. The position of the Lord of the Chaos Space belongs to me. When I return, it will be the day you die. I will be back. Heaven god transmigration said solemnly. The next moment, he was about to step into the rift and escape. Suddenly, an indifferent voice resounded. Did I say you could go? Oh. Heaven god transmigration paused. Everyone in the surroundings froze and raised their heads to take a look. Bufong's face was calm. He was holding Little Hu in his arms. Little Hu's cheeks were bulging, her eyes were wide, and her little tail was wagging from side to side. Her legs were held by Bufong with one hand, and Bufong was holding her belly with the other. As for her claws, they were stretched forward as if she was about to fly. Who do you think you are? A modern-day heaven god made of trash wants to stop me? How ridiculous! Heaven god transmigration sneered. Then he was about to step into the rift and escape. Suddenly, Bufong shook his head. I'm being looked down upon. I'm really unhappy. I don't like it, Bufong said lightly. Then he raised his palm and gently slapped Little Hu's buttocks. Little Hu's eyes widened in an instant. Ah, da. Chapter 1698. What is this stinky chef trying to do? Heaven god transmigration paused. He did not take Bufong seriously at all. Although he could not kill Bufong now, Bufong was just a heaven god who was a mixture of several modern-day heaven gods. He was not afraid of him at all. What puzzled him was that this guy still dared to make his presence known in front of him. Also, did he think he would stay obediently by pointing at him with a Little Hu fox? How naive! Heaven god transmigration sneered. The soul demon clenched his fist, and the void shattered. Half of his body had slipped into the spatial rift. Inside, energy was constantly sweeping and surging, possessing the power to destroy heaven and earth. However, when it hit him, it felt like an itch. Suddenly, heaven god transmigration paused. He raised his head slightly and looked into the distance. There the stinky chef raised his hand and slapped the fox's butt. The fox's mouth opened wide, and one golden meatball after another flew out of her mouth. What the hell? A meatball? Heaven god transmigration was confused. He was confused. So, is this chef going to kill me with a bunch of meatballs? Kill a heaven god with a meatball? How could this chef think of that? It was not just heaven god transmigration. The people around them were speechless when they found out that Bufong was going to use the fox's meatballs to stop heaven god transmigration, whom even heaven god time could not stop. Is he a fool? Does he think heaven god transmigration is a fool? Heaven God Transmigration is a respectable man. Can't he show me some respect? Rumble. A whistling sound rang out. One harmless meatball after another shot out of the void. They moved so fast that they swept across the void, stirring up a gentle ripple of energy. Half of Heaven God Transmigration's body was suspended in midair. He sneered. Then, he raised his hand and slapped the meatball. Meatballs! You should keep them for yourself. Heaven God, Samsara said. He did not sense any danger from a meatball. Then he thrust out his palm. The meatball was too fast. Puff, puff, puff. It struck Heaven God Transmigration's palm, but it was torn apart. Heaven God Transmigration was stunned. Everyone around them was stunned. Little who? Spray him to death. Avenge your brother, Era. Hades' Era burst out laughing. He stood up with his hands on his waist and laughed out loud. Lord Go was also looking forward to it. Under normal circumstances, Bufong would not have allowed Little Who to spit because Lord Go knew very well that the meatball was not powerful enough to defeat Heaven God Transmigration. But that's not beef meatballs. That's right. Lord Go and Hades' Era instantly discovered the difference. The meatballs that Little Who spat out were not beef meatballs. Boom! The explosion came as no surprise. The entire primal chaos began to tremble at this moment. Countless rays of light were dazzling and blinding everyone's eyes. Everyone was dumbfounded at this moment, and they were left with nothing but confusion. They could not believe that the power of the meatball was so terrifying. Boom! Boom! Little Who was still spitting out meatballs. She had swallowed all the meatballs cooked by the Great Soul Overlord's corpse. She did not even know how many meatballs she had saved up. She kept spitting them out, and each one seemed to shatter the void. Explosive energy kept sweeping across the primal chaos. There was even the aura of soul demons among them. However, there was a rich, meaty aroma that blanketed the entire primal chaos. It smells so good. What is this smell? Why does it smell so good? My heart has been itching for a long time. Meatballs smell so good. For the gods in the primal chaos, the aroma permeated the air. But for Heaven God Transmigration, what he was feeling right now was the stench of something foul. The stench enveloped him in all directions, making it hard for him to breathe. It almost drove him crazy. It stinks. It stinks. Heaven God Transmigration flew into a rage. His stomach convulsed as if it was about to overturn the sea and pour out at any moment. That uncomfortable feeling made him feel incomparably uncomfortable. Even his pores seemed to be absorbing the stench. This stench, it simply made him want to die. As a chef, why did he poop? When Heaven God Transmigration saw the intoxicated looks on the faces of the people down below, he felt as if he had seen a ghost. He had no idea what the aroma meant to soul demons. Suddenly, a meatball shot over and was stuffed into his mouth in an instant. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes widened. An explosion rang out. The huge energy blasted him away, and he was blasted out of the void alive. His bloodied appearance was no longer as high-spirited and vigorous as before. The void continued to crumble and crumble. Heaven God Transmigration felt that the disgusting smell was flowing all over his body. He had thought that meatballs were not very powerful. But the instant it exploded, he was horrified to realize how terrifying it was. This is the meat of a great soul overlord. Heaven God Transmigration stared incredulously at Bufong in the distance. Even though there were countless meatballs between him and Bufong, he did not dare to touch Bufong. Yes, it's the meat of a great soul overlord. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. In his arms, Little Who's head was shaking up and down, and holy light was spewing out of her mouth. She only stopped when Bufong gently patted her on the shoulder. Her mouth was slightly open, and hot steam rose from it as saliva dripped down her face. Little Who's eyes darted up and down. Perhaps she was nodding her head so hard that she felt a little dizzy. She was waving her claws as if asking Bufong, "Is it over?" In the distance, explosions kept ringing out, and each explosion caused the void to collapse. Heaven God Transmigration was trapped in a vortex of energy. Under such circumstances, he could not continue traveling through the void. It was very likely that his body would be torn apart by the energy of the void. The smoke and dust cleared. Heaven God Transmigration's face was miserable. His flesh was riddled with holes, and blood kept flowing out of them. The explosion of the soul demon meatballs had caused serious damage to his body. Well done, little who is a fox. After this battle, I will treat you to spicy strips. Hades Era's eyes lit up. As soon as Hades Era said that, little who burped and smoke spread out. Boom! Heaven God Transmigration took a step forward and fled into the distance. Bufong focused his eyes. With Little Who in his arms, he gently raised his hand and patted Little Who's butt. Keep going. Don't stop. Bufong said. Burp. Little Who burped. Little who had been stuck for a while, finally recovered. Bufong stepped into the air, keeping a distance from Heaven God Transmigration. Every meatball exploded on Heaven God Transmigration's body, causing Little Who to keep bursting. The latter fled with his hands over his head. Heaven God Transmigration's heart was filled with hatred. He had fused with the arm. He had mastered supreme strength. He felt that he was invincible. He was the lord of the chaos space. But why was he being chased by a fox's meatball? Slash! Suddenly, a meatball broke his defense. It sank deep into his muscles. It exploded in his muscles. Heaven God Transmigration howled miserably. That fragrance even flowed through his body. Blurg. Heaven God Transmigration lay prone in midair, vomiting until the sky darkened. Slash! One meatball after another sank deep into his skin. It exploded. The fused soul demon arm, which the Lord Go and Hades Era could not tear off no matter how hard they tried. It was actually broken by a few meatballs. Heaven God Transmigration howled miserably. All the people down below did not know what to say. Suddenly, the broken arm seemed to have gained sentience. He turned around and slapped. Then he landed on Heaven God Transmigration's body. A look of horror came over Heaven God Transmigration's face, because his body had been smashed into pieces by the palm. With a crack, it shattered into thousands of pieces. A twisted soul rushed up reluctantly. There seemed to be a supreme suction force bursting out of the arm, and Heaven God Transmigration's transmigration was immediately pulled into it. The scene, it silenced everyone. The consequence of asking a tiger for its skin was the same as Heaven God Transmigration. The arm backfired and killed Heaven God Transmigration. Bufong covered Little Who's mouth with his hand. Foxy's eyes widened, and her eyes darted around. He stared into the distance. Heaven God Transmigration had disappeared, and all that was left was an arm. However, the arm gave him an unparalleled sense of crisis. Lord Go soared into the sky. Hades Era flew over in an instant and landed beside Bufong, looking solemnly at the arm in the distance. Is it over? Hades Era asked. No, it's just the beginning. Lord Go exhaled. He grew more and more serious. The shadow that the arm had cast on him had not disappeared yet. The arm hovered in midair. The broken void kept twisting it, but it could not hurt it at all. After absorbing Heaven God Transmigration's soul, the arm seemed to have come back to life. Suddenly, the arm was raised. Bufong, Lord Go, and the others all tensed up. Cracks slowly appeared on the arm. That gave everyone pause. The next moment, that crack suddenly tore open and widened. Numerous scarlet eyeballs appeared on the arm, each of them spinning, and a ferocious aura emanated from them. The palm of the arm, a pair of condescending eyes, stared coldly at Bufong. The look made Bufong hold his breath. Little Who was so frightened by the look that he burped. He felt that burping in this serious atmosphere was not right. So, he quickly covered his mouth with his little paw. That look, Bufong was startled, and the blood in his body seemed to flow faster. Just when everyone thought the arm was going to do something, they found that the arm had torn through the void and fled. That gave everyone pause. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. My pig trotter, don't run, Bufong roared. The law of space swirled, tore through the void and appeared where the arm was in a flash. Rumble, however, the speed at which the arm escaped was simply too fast. All that was left was the pair of eyeballs staring at him. Pig Trotter? All the people in the chaos space were dumbfounded. It was only later that they realized that Bufong had his eyes on the soul demon arm. Does he think the soul demon arm is an ingredient? As expected of a chef, the way he looks at his enemies is always so special. The soul demon's arm tore through the void and disappeared into it in an instant. Soon, it could no longer be seen. The void slowly healed, leaving only Heaven God Transmigration's broken body swaying in midair. Lord Go and Hades' era flew over. They were silent as they looked at the healed void. I can't believe he escaped. Hades' era smacked his lips and said, "Is Heaven God Transmigration dead?" He's not dead, although he was devoured. I have an intuition that he's not dead. Lord Go said, a modern-day Heaven God would not die so easily. But it's fine. The space he tore did not lead to the chaotic universe. It should lead to another universe, Lord Go said. It's not the soul demon universe either, Bufong said. Bufong did not sense the aura of the soul demon universe. He had sealed the spatial rift, so he was familiar with that aura. Lord Go nodded. They sensed the place where the arm disappeared and found that the aura of the void was still fluctuating. This remnant aura of the universe. Lord Go seemed to be deep in thought. It seems to be that place. Bufong gave Lord Go a puzzled look. It seemed that Lord Go knew where the arm had disappeared. The last look in the arm's eyes still left a shadow in Bufong's heart. Bufong felt that he could not let the arm continue to grow wretchedly. What is that place? Bufong said. Lord Go's fat body jiggled. He glanced at Bufong and grinned. An abandoned place, Void City. Chapter 1699. Void City? The Lord Go's words gave Bufong pause, and then he furrowed his brows. He had an impression of the name. The noble woman seemed to be from Void City. She took you with her. He did not expect to hear about Void City from the Lord Go. Lord Go, how much do you know about Void City? Bufong took a deep breath and asked the Lord Go. Void City. The Lord Go paused slightly. He did not expect that Bufong would be interested in Void City. It was a forbidden place in many universes. Many ancient heaven gods and even modern-day heaven gods were exiled to Void City. I don't know much about Void City, Lord Go. I only know that it is a very powerful place. Since ancient times, exiled ancient heaven gods and heaven god from various universes have gathered there, the Lord Go said. There should be records about Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. There should be records of Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. You should know everything once you find it. Besides, if you want to go to Void City, you must rely on the Temple of Heaven God Space. The Temple of Heaven God Space has the most complete and detailed map of the universe in the whole chaotic universe. Bufong fell silent. Hades' era also came over. Void City. Bufong, young man, what are you going to do there? It's not a fun place. Hades' era said, you were taken away by someone. That person said she came from Void City. Bufong said expressionlessly. It seemed that Bufong had not told the Lord Go and Hades' era about this. The pupils of the Lord Go and era constricted. The cursed goddess. Void City. Are you the one chosen by the Queen of Curses? Lord Go sighed. If that was the case, things would be a little troublesome. The relationship between Void City and the chaotic universe was not very good. However, they didn't think too much about it and landed on the ground. The surroundings were in ruins, but the Temple of Heavenly God Life had been restored to its original state thanks to the Lord Go's use of the laws of time. The Lord Go glanced over. All ancient heavenly gods, god kings, and deity emperors lowered their heads in shame when he looked at them. Heaven God Transmigration had abandoned them and destroyed their worship for him. Now, these heavenly gods had chosen to submit to the heavenly time god without any reservations. What happened next was very simple. Under the pressure of the Lord Go's aura, all of the ancient races of the primordial chaos submitted. In fact, they were actually quite happy to submit to the heavenly time god. Of course, this matter definitely wouldn't end so easily. These powerful beings of the ancient race had to atone for the sins that they had committed over the countless years. As heaven god time, the Lord Go moved the river of time. They could clearly see everything that had happened in the primal chaos over countless years. The experts of the ancient race trembled in fear. As the Lord Go watched, all their sins would be seen by the Lord Go. The Lord Go was watching the river of time. The more he watched, the more unsightly his face became. These animals, the Lord Go snorted coldly, and a terrible aura spread in an instant. The god kings and god emperors felt their bodies and bodies tremble. The wrath of a heaven god was very terrifying. The reckoning of a heaven god was even more terrifying. As for how to settle the score, it had nothing to do with Bufang. In any case, Bufang could clearly sense the Lord Go's wrath. Many ancient experts were targeted by the Lord Go and thrown into the prison in the chaos space. When Heaven God Space returned, he would banish these ancient experts who had committed heinous crimes to Void City. Of course, some experts who had committed heinous crimes were directly killed by the Lord Go. Under the endless torture of the law of time, these experts directly decayed. The Temple of Heaven God Time, with the recovery of the Lord Go's cultivation base, the temple was gradually restored. Although it was not as magnificent as the Temple of Heaven God Transmigration, it still had a magnificent aura. As the first spokesperson of the Lord Go, Yun Tianyi's status in the chaos space had also risen. Many of the almighty experts of the ancient race did not dare to offend her. The heavenly time god had completely purged all of the sins within the chaos, and the murky chaos seemed to have been restored to its former clarity overnight. The gods living in the chaos space cheered and jumped for joy. The chaos space was clear again. Next, there were more important things that the Lord Go and the others had to solve. In the depths of the Temple of Heaven God Time, there was a round stone table placed on top of it. Many figures were seated around the stone table. The stone table was very large, and the figures sitting around it were all the top experts of the chaos space. They were the Lord Go, Yun Tianyi, Hades Era, Bufang, and some ancient heaven gods of the ancient race. The group of people sat around the table, their faces somewhat grave. They were discussing the resurrection of the other heaven gods. Heaven god Transmigration has betrayed us and given up Transmigration. Now, there is one more causality god. There is no new heaven god who can inherit this position, so the position of heaven god in the chaos space is temporarily replaced by Bufang, the Lord Go said, glancing at the people present. As heaven god time, he was very imposing, and his aura spread across the whole place. No one dared to say anything. Bufang was a heaven god who had comprehended 5 supreme laws, and the law of transmigration was one of them, so no one had any objections. Bufang wanted to refuse. He only wanted to cook, not become heaven god transmigration. That was not his style. However, the Lord Go's words were very serious. The chaos space could not go without transmigration. Heaven God Transmigration was in charge of the cycle of life and death in the entire chaotic universe, which was very important. It was fine for a short period of time, for it had the ability to adjust itself. However, if it took too long, the cycle would collapse and countless souls would wander the universe and turn into cosmic energy. The lives of heaven and earth would continue to decrease. Therefore, transmigration could not go without a master. Therefore, Bufang reluctantly took over. However, Bufang had said that if he found a suitable candidate, he would immediately give up the position of heaven god transmigration. The Lord Go nodded in agreement. There was no objection during the voting, and it was unanimously approved. Just like that, Bufang became the supreme heaven god transmigration. In addition to discussing this topic, they also discussed the return of heaven god space and heaven god destruction. Until now, no one knew where heaven god space and heaven god destruction were. That was because the 2 heaven gods had been sent into transmigration by heaven god transmigration, and their memories have been sealed. These two heavenly gods were slightly weaker than the heavenly time god, but not as powerful as the heavenly life god. So far, there had been no clues. Now that the Lord Go had returned, he wanted to restore the chaos space to its former glory, so he had to find the other two heaven gods. However, it was not difficult to find the two heaven gods. After they were transmigrated, they might be a blade of grass or a stone. Even if they were individuals, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack to find a heaven god in the vast sea of people in the chaotic universe, billions of small worlds, and countless people. According to heaven god space and heaven god destruction are very likely to be near us. Think about it. Even if they are transmigrated, there should be a corresponding attraction between heaven gods. Look at me and Lord Go. We are so in love, Hades Era said with a spicy strip in his mouth. Lord Go rolled his eyes. How could they be in love with each other? However, when he heard Hades Era's words, Lord Go was taken aback. Lord Go's eyes narrowed, and a glint seemed to flash across them. He glanced at Bu Fong, who was dozing off at the edge of the round table, and Little Hu and Xiaopi, who were lying on Bu Fong's shoulders. If the reincarnation of the two heaven gods was related to the people around him, could it be related to Bu Fong? Whether it was Era or Lord Go, both had an inseparable bond with Bu Fong. So, they could start with Bu Fong. The two heaven gods were deep in thought. Yun Tianyi and many ancient experts touched their chins and nodded in agreement. Although they did not know why they were nodding, their intuition told them that it was always right to follow the heaven god's train of thought. Bu Fong woke up with a start and felt a chill. What are you doing? He glanced at everyone expressionlessly and felt a sense of malice. Ha! Hades Era rubbed his hands and grinned. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes. Why are you smiling so wickedly? Don't come to me for spicy strips for the next year. Hades Era was speechless. Lord Go told Bu Fong his analysis. Bu Fong's face was filled with suspicion. Was there such a thing? He only had Little Hu, Xiaopi, and Xiaobai left. Xiaobai was a product of the system, so he could not be a heaven god. So, Little Hu and Xiaopi were the only ones left? Could these two be heaven gods? The meeting was soon over. There were many things to be done in the chaos space. Little Hu and Xiaopi were left behind by Lord Go. He wanted to study them to see if they were the reincarnations of heaven gods. As for Bu Fong, he walked toward the palace of heaven god transmigration under Yun Tianyi's lead. Bu Fong had the law of transmigration, so he quickly took over the unowned palace of heaven god transmigration. Walking in the palace, Bu Fong could only sigh. Heaven god transmigration had lived a good life for countless years. Yun Tianyi introduced every place in the palace to Bu Fong. When the door was opened, thousands of dazzling treasures were piled up like a mountain. All kinds of rare treasures were piled up in it. In a divine herb pavilion, all kinds of divine herbs were flying around. The elixir pavilion, the library, and so on, all kinds of heaven god transmigration's treasures were now Bu Fong's. Why is there no food pavilion? Bu Fong curled his lips. Yun Tianyi did not know how to answer. Heaven god transmigration was not a chef. Why would he need a food pavilion? The two of them opened the underground palace. Clip-clop, clip-clop, the sound of Yun Tianyi's heels echoed in the empty space. A strong smell of blood assailed their nostrils. Bu Fong and Yun Tianyi could not help but frown. Bu Fong snapped his fingers, and a divine flame appeared, illuminating the whole underground palace. The scene in the underground palace was soon illuminated. Yun Tianyi and Bu Fong were stunned. It was a huge pool of blood, and there were also broken chains. Vengeful souls floated in the air, and the corpses of heaven gods and gods kept flowing. The pool of blood had dried up, but the blood in it was still flowing. It was like a place of bondage, trapping all the vengeful souls in it. Countless vengeful souls lay at the mouth of the pool, crying silently at Yun Tianyi and Bu Fong. This is too hateful. Yun Tianyi's eyes turned red. She sensed the bones and blood of many heaven gods from the Yun clan in the pool. When the Yun clan was captured by heaven god transmigration, they were slaughtered. Bu Fong sighed. The law of transmigration swept out, and sent all the vengeful souls into the transmigration. When the vengeful souls drifted into the transmigration, they seemed to weep with joy, and their cries filled the underground palace. Bufang fell silent as he watched. The god of cooking Set emerged in an instant. The rice splashed down like colored glaze. Portions of ingredients floated around Bufang's body. In the underground palace, facing the shocking pool of blood, Bufang began to cook. It was a heavy dish. At least, when Bufang cooked, it was very heavy. Ingredients flew in all directions, and smoke filled the air. Bowls of glowing, glass-like dishes were placed in blue and white porcelain bowls and piled up one by one. The aroma lingered in the air as if it had turned into a harmonious movement. It was as if a supreme being was chanting the Sanskrit to purify the resentful souls. "What is this?" Yin Tianyi pursed her lips and asked Bufang with a heavy heart. "This is the soul-ferrying rice," Bufang said. It was a bowl of rice that sent these souls into the transmigration to wash away the hatred in their hearts. The drifting souls were surrounded by the aroma. Prostrating before the bowls, they ate with relish, their faces filled with intoxication. The divine energy of these souls had been drained by heaven god transmigration, so they were just a bunch of invisible souls now. Without the ability to affect reality, they could only eat the soul ferrying rice invisibly. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, Bufang exerted the law of transmigration and opened the transmigration. One by one, the souls flew into the transmigration contentedly. Suddenly, Yin Tianyi's eyes turned red. She raised her hand and faced the souls in front of her. The souls of a man and a woman seemed to be smiling at her with relief. After eating the soul-ferrying rice, their resentment was purified and they flew into the transmigration. After a few years, they would be alive again. "Thank you." Yin Tianyi wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said to Bufang. They were her parents. Their souls had been overwhelmed by hatred, but after being baptized by the soul-ferrying rice, they had regained their sanity and peacefully entered the transmigration. They would not be turned into ashes. Bufang nodded silently. Sometimes the effect of delicious food always amazed Bufang. The soul-ferrying rice, which had suddenly appeared in his mind, made him emotional. After seeing the tragic scene, Bufang also understood how miserable the chaos space had been under Heaven God Transmigration's rule for so many years. That Heaven God Transmigration. Damn it. Even if he fled to Void City, Bufang would not spare him. He would just take it as seeking justice for these souls. The two of them walked out of the underground palace. Standing in the center of the temple, Bufang finally saw the transmigration that belonged to Heaven God Transmigration for the first time. The transmigration that he had seen once before was slowly unfolding in front of Bufang like a beautiful painting. The gray transmigration wheeled in midair. Mental force slowly flowed out of Bufang's starry sky spirit sea and fused with it. For a moment, Bufang's pupils constricted. At that moment, he saw a lot. Chapter 1700. There were too many things that could be seen when one entered the cycle of reincarnation. Reincarnation could be said to be a huge cycle. When a person died, their soul would enter the cycle of reincarnation and wander in it for countless years. Their consciousness and memories would disappear, and they would return to the body and become a new person. This was the cycle of reincarnation in the chaotic universe, the foundation of endless life and death. Bufang had seen too many people's lives in the cycle of reincarnation. Reincarnation was not heartless. Instead, it was like a huge complex of emotions. All kinds of emotions were gathered in the cycle of reincarnation, fermenting and brewing as if they were about to completely explode. Bufang exited the cycle of reincarnation and couldn't help but let out a deep breath. Reincarnation made him emotional, as if his entire experience had become rich and mellow. Peeping into the cycle of reincarnation. This kind of life was not bad. Therefore, Bufang began to peep into it with relish. Xiaopi and Little Who stood in front of Lord Go. Lord Go strode back and forth with elegant cat-like steps, his dog tail wagging. In front of him, Little Who was half squatting on the ground, staring at Lord Go with pure and innocent eyes like precious gems, as if he didn't understand what Lord Go meant. Xiaopi was lying on the ground, blowing bubbles. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. Behind him stood Hades' Era. Era was holding a spicy strip in his mouth, calm and unruffled. The man and the dog seemed to be plotting something big. Foxy and Shrimpy, on the other hand, were confused. Little Who, come here and sit down. Lord Go waved his paw at Little Who. Little Who was very obedient, because she knew that this dog was not to be trifled with. The flesh on Lord Go's dog face was trembling, and he stared at Little Who with fear. Buzz, Lord Go shook his hand, and suddenly, the power of a law appeared. It was the law of space. The silver law of space gently waved. It immediately shot out and floated around Little Who's body. Although Lord Go was heaven god time, he also mastered other supreme laws. Of course, he was not as strong as other modern-day heaven gods. However, he was still able to control the law of space. The law of space revolved around Little Who. Without any reaction, it finally disappeared. Lord Go narrowed his eyes. It doesn't look like it, Lord Go sighed. If Little Who was the reincarnation of the heavenly god of space, she should be able to sense the laws of space. However, looking at Little Who's adorable face, it was clear that the laws of space had no effect on her. As for the law of destruction, forget it. Lord Go felt that the law of destruction was even less likely to belong to Little Who. How could this adorable creature be the reincarnation of the heavenly destruction god? How could it possibly be a terrifying brawny man who destroyed everything in his path? Lord Go couldn't accept this. Xiaopi also tried the law of space, but there was no reaction. Apart from spitting out an extra bubble, nothing else happened. Lord Go had no choice but to let them go. The two little things flew in the chaos as if they were running away. Logically speaking, heavenly god Bufong is very likely to be related to Bufong. Since it's not those two little creatures, who could it be? Even that idiot Era could be a heavenly god, so the others are more likely. It's really hard to judge. Lord Go raised a paw and scratched his head. He was so annoyed that he pulled out a few strands of dog fur. As the heavenly time god, Lord Go still had a lot of things to deal with. He naturally didn't have that much time to entertain Xiaopi and Little Who. However, Lord Go believed that the return of the heavenly life god and the heavenly time god would be enough to affect the chaos and cause the other two heavenly gods to return. However, it would take some time. Heavenly god transmigration could be considered to have fallen. Today's chaos did not need to continue to be stagnant. Lord Go and Era used their heaven god power to open the chaos. A rumbling sound rang out. The whole chaotic universe was completely shaken at this moment. The three divine dynasties, many great worlds, countless small worlds, and some unknown continents could all feel the changes in heaven and earth. The great path of heaven and earth had become stronger, and the energy between heaven and earth had become denser. More and more geniuses were recovering like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Time passed. In the Xiai divine dynasty, thunder rumbled, and another heaven god tribulation fell. The Xiai divine emperor stood majestically between heaven and earth, transcending the heaven god tribulation with supreme power. This was the divine emperor's second heaven god tribulation. The lightning spread for 30,000 miles in the divine dynasty. With supreme divine power, the divine emperor broke the lightning, tore open a passage, and rushed into the chaos. He now possessed the power of an ancient heaven god. In the divine dynasty, Lord Go and Hades' Era received him. The Xiai divine emperor never thought that Lord Go and Hades' Era were modern-day heaven gods. He was caught off guard at that moment. In addition, the geniuses hidden in the chaotic universe began to break through one after another. Before the chaos appeared, heaven god transmigration controlled heaven and earth. Countless top god emperors failed to break through and were forcibly wiped out. Therefore, some of the most talented geniuses suppressed their cultivation bases and waited for an opportunity. Now, the opportunity had come. The top god emperors who traveled in the chaotic universe broke through to the realm of saints of the Great Path, which was the level of ancient heaven gods. For a moment, the overall strength of the chaotic universe began to improve. The universe seemed to be blooming, and a majestic world suddenly descended. Time flew. Time flew. The higher one's cultivation base, the more numb they became to the passage of time. 100 years flew by in the blink of an eye. In the chaos, the temple of heaven god transmigration had taken on a new look. Outside the temple, there was a small restaurant with a long line in front of it. If anyone were here, they would be surprised to find that the people waiting outside the restaurant were all distinguished top experts of the chaotic universe. There were new heaven gods, top god emperors, and even the rulers of the ancient clans. A fat black dog was lying in front of the restaurant. No one dared to step within 3 meters of the dog. It was the same even for heaven gods. The reason was that this dog was the supreme ruler of the chaotic universe, heaven god time. Of course, if one looked into the restaurant, a handsome man in a white robe with a spicy strip in his mouth was bragging to a large group of people. He was none other than heaven god life. A small restaurant had gathered all the supreme existences of the chaotic universe. Who dared to cause trouble? The whole restaurant was extremely harmonious. Ting-a-ling. The curtain of the kitchen was pulled aside. A skinny figure slowly walked out from it. The figure was holding a blue and white porcelain bowl with golden soup swirling in it. It was a bowl of soup stewed with dragon bones and black phoenix, a very delicious dish. The chef was none other than Bufong. He was Bufong, who was temporarily replacing heaven god transmigration. After comprehending 100 years of reincarnation, Bufong's temperament had changed greatly. He had fused his comprehension of reincarnation into his cooking, causing every dish to be extremely flavorful. 100 years had passed since Bufong's cultivation base began to improve rapidly. Not only had his cultivation base improved a lot, but his temperament had also become more stable. His cooking skills and strength had improved too quickly, so they might be a little unstable. However, 100 years of cultivation had made this concern disappear. Although he was still at the level of a saint of the Great Path, his fighting prowess was somewhat unfathomable. Bufong, young man, the renovation of the Temple of Heaven God Life has been completed. Also, I have finally found the hidden recipe. Hades Era raised his eyebrows and said excitedly to Bufong. Bufong put down the dish in his hand. The golden soup swayed and dripped, giving off a rich aroma. Oh, Bufong nodded and wiped his hands. Give me the recipe. I've finished cooking. Come and get it, Bufong said. Hades Era's face turned bitter. Can't you move to Ai's palace? Bufong gave him a sideways glance. I can't take that recipe out of the Temple of Heaven God Life. I will prepare the best kitchen for you with the best cooking conditions, Nether King Erha said confidently. Bufong rolled his eyes. After closing for the day, Bufong bade farewell to the regular customers in the restaurant and left with Hades Era. Lord Go's recipe had been completed 100 years ago. At that time, it had perfected Lord Go's foundation, restored Lord Go's cultivation base to the level of a chaotic saint, and made him the strongest expert in the chaos space. Now, Hades Era's recipe had finally been found. He was speechless. He had spent 100 years looking for a recipe. They arrived at the Temple of Heaven God Life. Hades Era had decorated the temple in a very flashy manner. All kinds of showy decorations filled the once simple and unadorned temple. Lord Go had once told Bufong that Heaven God Life was an upright and handsome man who did not like to smile. However, he did not know if his brain had gone haywire after reincarnation. Why did he become such a clown? Bufong carefully took the golden recipe from Hades Era's hands. Looking at the golden recipe, Bufong felt his eyes light up. His spirit sea surged with a terrifying aura. This golden menu seemed to illuminate his spirit sea as if it was daytime. Bufong had a feeling that if he could help the 5 heaven gods cook all the dishes in the recipe, he might be able to break through. The new system did not tell Bufong how to break through his cultivation base. In fact, at this level, the system could not provide much help to Bufong. Basically, Bufong had to figure out the rest by himself. Bufong, on the other hand, was to help the heaven gods cook the dishes in the recipe. Bufong had searched for heaven god transmigration in the temple of heaven god transmigration. If he wanted to find a new recipe, he might have to wait for the new heaven god transmigration to appear. He recorded the contents of the golden recipe in his mind. Bufong felt countless ingredients flying around in his mind. The dishes in the golden recipe were not ordinary dishes, and the ingredients were difficult to find. It would be very difficult to succeed in one go. Naturally, he had to take it slow. Therefore, in the following days, Bufong stayed in the temple of heaven god life. He began to simulate cooking at a steady pace. Hades' era paced back and forth in front of the door anxiously. After all, Bufong's dish was related to his lifelong happiness. After a few years, Bufong completed the simulation. With his hands clasped behind his back, he left with Xiao Bai, Xiao Opi, and Little Hu. He roamed the primordial chaos, wandering the chaos verse in search of food ingredients. It was useless for Hades' era to be anxious. He could only wait for Bufong's return every day. He had been waiting for Bufong's return. As soon as he returned, Bufong began to cook. A rumble echoed out. Countless lightning bolts gathered above the temple of heaven god life. The entire chaotic universe trembled. On this day, the Lord Go, many ancient heaven gods, and the experts of the ancient clans gathered in the temple of heaven god life. The changes in heaven and earth attracted their attention. Countless beams of golden light and majestic energy shot out of the temple of heaven god life. The dish that Hades' era had been waiting for was finally completed. Creak. A rumbling sound rang out. Behind the closed stone door of the temple of heaven god life, Bufong slowly walked out of it. Everyone froze and stared at Bufong. Then, their eyes fell on Bufong's hand. In Bufong's hand, there was a golden spicy strip floating in the air. Was this the dish cooked from the golden recipe? Everyone was shocked and in an uproar. On this day, the moment Bufong finished cooking the dish, a cold light flashed in his eyes. A rumbling sound rang out. In the boundless chaotic universe, a clamor arose, and smoke billowed. Some people were shocked to discover that a dilapidated palace was slowly rising from the chaotic land. In the blink of an eye, Lord Go had appeared above the palace. Looking at the huge palace, he was stunned. The temple of heaven god space. Heaven god space hasn't returned. Why did the temple of heaven god space appear first? Chapter 17:01. The appearance of the temple of heaven god space shocked everyone. However, it was a fact that heaven god space had not returned. Even the Lord Go was puzzled. Logically speaking, only when a heaven god returned would the temple of heaven god life appear, just like how Era had awakened and returned, leading to the return of the temple of heaven god life. Bufong, on the other hand, did not mind. The appearance of the temple of heaven god space surprised Bufong a little. With the appearance of the temple of heaven god space, he would be able to enter it and learn something about Void City. After 100 years, Bufong had become much calmer. However, Bufong still remembered the scene of you being taken away. Bufong had promised you that he would go to Void City to find her, and now it was time to fulfill that promise. A dilapidated palace with an ancient and dilapidated aura appeared in the chaotic land without any sense of incongruity. Bufong and the Lord Go stood in front of the palace. They exchanged a glance, then stepped into the temple of heaven god space without hesitation. The palace was spacious, and the air was filled with the law of space. Moreover, the law of space was stacked on top of one another, making the small space look as boundless as the sea. However, Bufong had mastered the law of space, and although the Lord Go's mastery was not strong, he knew a little about it. With a thought, the two of them pulled the space closer. As they walked through the great hall, they passed by crumbling walls and broken walls. The Temple of Heaven God Space had the most comprehensive information about the universe. This was what the Lord Go had told Bufang. You should be able to find a way to Void City in the Temple of Heaven God Space. The Lord Go told Bufang that a long time ago, it was Heaven God Space who was in charge of the banishment of the ancient heaven gods. The library was not difficult to find. The dusty stone door was pushed open, revealing the library inside. With a creak, the dust fell from the door. A man and a dog stepped into the library. Rumble. As soon as he entered, he saw a boundless starry sky. The stars in the starry sky were shining brightly. This treasure pavilion was actually a star map. Lord Go walked gracefully like a cat. He reached out his dog paw, grabbed a star in the void, and pulled it out, instantly pulling out a book. It was a thick book with a tattered cover. Lord Go flipped through the old book with his exquisite paw, then threw it aside. The book that was thrown away floated in the air and turned back into a star. The Lord Go searched as he walked. If my memory serves me right, the books of Void City should be among these stars. Bufang said. The Lord Go said, "Let's take our time." Bufang nodded. He was not in a hurry, but he had his own ways. He was the only heavenly god who had mastered 5 supreme laws of the universe. Bufang's ability could be said to have combined the abilities of 5 heavenly gods. The mental force of the starry sky spread. In front of Bufang's eyes, all the misty things disappeared in an instant, and specks of light swirled rapidly. Each star seemed to have come to life, and every breath they took contained the power of the laws. Raising his hand, Bufang's palm glowed with light. The next moment, he found a dim star. It was very dim and inconspicuous. Bufang reached out a hand and made a grabbing motion in the star. Soon, Bufang pulled out a thick book. The law of space swirled around it and formed the book. Found it. Lord Go moved his head closer and stared at the thick book in Bufang's hand. Bufang nodded and sat on the ground. Carefully, he opened the book, and the scene in front of him changed abruptly. Rumble. In front of Bufang's eyes, he seemed to see a huge city floating in the starry sky. That city was built on a floating meteorite. It was a majestic city, and countless curses were wrapped around it like chains. Outside the city, there were piles of bones everywhere. There were the bones of giant dragons, the bones of winged people, and the bones of heavenly gods. There were all kinds of bones from different universes and worlds. Every one of them was emanating a vast amount of energy. There was no doubt that these corpses had been respectable people when they were alive. From a distance, the city seemed to be built on bones. The sight of it was enough to strike fear into anyone's heart. So this is Void City. Lord Dog heaved a sigh of relief, as though he wanted to release the shock in his heart. Bufang nodded. According to the noblewoman, Void City was very strong. The queen of Void City was even stronger than a chaotic saint. Bufang was not sure if he could save you. Most importantly, the queen of curses of Void City hated chefs the most. Therefore, this made things a lot more difficult for Bufang. Bufang continued to flip through the book. The book was an introduction to Void City. Heaven God Space had traveled the infinite universe and recorded countless paths of stars. He must have been a Void City, the land of exile. He was, in fact, a traveler. He recorded the places he had traveled, introduced them, and evaluated them. Bufang read for a while and soon found the path of stars in the book about how to get to Void City. He needed to create an array to get there. After all, they were in different universes, so he naturally needed the help of an array to get there. The woman who took you away also came here with the help of an array. Although the array was complicated, Bufang memorized it with just a glance. Compared with the gourmet array, the complexity of this array was not a problem for Bufang. Bufang closed the book. Then he exhaled. The book returned and turned into a stream of light. Have you really decided to go to Void City? Lord Go asked seriously, looking at Bufang. The danger of Void City was self-evident, and it was also recorded in Heaven God Space's book. For chefs, Void City was a deadly place. Chefs in Void City were almost extinct. The world is vast. It's always good to travel more. Bufong twitched the corner of his mouth indifferently. The two of them left the temple of Heaven God Space. Lord Go did not try to persuade him again. He knew what kind of place Void City was, but he also felt Bufong's determination. It was useless to persuade him. Since you want to go, you can take those ancient heaven gods, god kings, and god emperors who have done many evil things with heaven god transmigration. Lord Go thought for a moment, then gave the task to Bufong. Bufong glanced at Lord Go. This fat dog had changed. He could not believe that he was ordering him around. However, Bufong did not refuse. He needed an excuse to go to Void City. They returned to the restaurant. Bufong called Xiao Bai, Little Hu, and Xiaopi. He was going to Void City, so he brought them with him. Little Hu now had soul demon meatballs, so his strength was not weak. As for Xiaopi, he would just treat him as a mascot. The news that Bufong was going to leave soon spread throughout the chaos space. Hades Era came over with his golden, spicy strip. After expressing his reluctance to part, he asked Bufong for some stock. Bufong did not refuse and gave them all to Era. Era wanted to go with him, but Bufong refused. After all, Era was now Heaven God life, and he needed to manage the chaos space. After explaining the situation to the other old customers and bidding them farewell, Bufong began to conquer. The power of the law of space swirled, and soon he created an array that led to Void City. With Heaven God Space's array, it was easy for Bufong to create an array at his current level. Clatter, the sound of chains colliding rang out. Cold chains collided with the void. A group of exiles was brought here by the Lord Go. The eyes of these exiles were dim. When they learned that they were going to be banished to Void City, they basically despaired. As old men in the chaos space, how could they not know the horror of Void City? It was a place of no return. They had thought that since Heaven God Space had not returned, they might not be exiled. Who would have thought that this stinky chef could also take them to Void City? For a moment, these ancient heaven gods, god kings, and god emperors all stared hatefully at Bufong. Bufong ignored them. He took the chains and threw them to Xiao Bai. He put Xiao Bai in charge of these exiles, while he continued to draw the array. In today's chaos space, no one dared to claim to be the best in the comprehension of the law of space except Bufong. With Bufong's creation, the teleportation array gradually took shape in the temple of Heaven God Space. Then, Bufong took out many minerals and crystals. These crystals could provide a vast amount of energy, enough for Bufong to complete a cosmic jump. Many people in the chaos space were watching. They felt it was a pity that Bufong had to leave. After all, Bufong's food was too delicious. However, they were also excited about the opening of the path to Void City. This meant that the once glorious chaotic universe was about to return. Rumble. Countless strands of energy gathered and soon turned into a beam of light that shot into the sky. The array rotated and emitted a dazzling light. Then, a loud rumble rang out. Accompanied by the rotation of the array, the beam of light rushed into the chaos space. The chaos space twisted and turned into a twisted entrance. The entrance was deep and full of terrible destructive power. However, Bufong knew that it led to Void City. He patted Xiao Bai's belly. Bufong glanced at Lord Go, Hades Era, and the others, then nodded. The faces of the crowd were somewhat solemn as they watched Bufong leave. The next moment, Bufong took a step forward. The law of space spread under his feet, and he rose into the sky. Rumble, like a stream of silver light. He flew into the twisted space in a flash. With a tug of White E's fan-like palm, those exiled people immediately staggered and were pulled into the entrance. Many of them cried and did not want to go. However, their cries were eventually swallowed by the light. But as the beam of light faded away, the chaos space returned to calm. The crowd was in a trance. They looked at the void in silence. Lord Go sighed. Bufong has left. It's going to be a long time before I can eat sweet and sour ribs again. Hades Era was a little depressed. It seemed that he would have to eat spicy strips sparingly. I hope Bufong boy can rescue Nethery safely. He murmured. Lord Go sighed. It's not that easy. It's not like you don't know the tempers of those people in Void City. They have never been kind to our chaotic universe. Hades' era held a spicy strip between his lips. Although they did not say it, they were actually worried about Bufong. The teleportation of the array was very fast. Traveling from one universe to another was a very uncomfortable thing. Even with Bufong's fleshly body, he could feel the powerful pressure of the power of space. He did not know how long the discomfort lasted. Finally, Bufong broke free from the discomfort. Clatter! The sound of chains colliding rang out. Behind him, Whitey's metal wings were spread, and it was dragging a group of exiles with it, dragging a chain behind it. These people looked terrified as they stared at Bufong. He raised his hand and sensed the universe where Void City was. Rumble! His mental force spread and filled a boundless distance in an instant. Bufong paused. It was a dilapidated and dead universe. The stars in the starry sky were basically broken and lifeless. Between the stars, there were many ancient starry sky ships traveling. There seemed to be existences as strong as saints of the Great Path sitting on each of them. In the center of Bufong's mental force, there a huge, magnificent city floated in the starry sky. It shook the whole universe and plundered all the energy in it. Outside the city, corpses were everywhere. This was Void City. Bufong's mental force sensed the city from a great distance. Suddenly, all of a sudden, a terrible mental pressure exploded out of Void City. The pressure made Bufong's expression flicker. How dare you spy on Void City in this universe? You're courting death. An extremely powerful mental force followed the trajectory of Bufong's mental force and shot toward Bufong with killing intent. Wherever the mental force passed, the ancient ships exploded. Chapter 17:02 Rumble. The mental force seemed to have turned corporeal, turning into a wave of energy that shot toward Bufong at high speed from a distance. Wherever it passed, stars crumbled, and ancient ships exploded in an instant. Even the wreckage of many stars was destroyed and turned into dregs. The terrible power was frightening. It was not weaker than the power of a chaotic saint. Moreover, the level of its mental force seemed to be even higher. Bufong's expression changed. The mental force made him feel a sense of crisis. Rumble. In his spirit's sea, the artifact spirits roared, and the array of 4 quadrants was formed in an instant. The terrible mental force turned into an invisible palm and slapped down toward Bufong. The stars went dark in an instant, and the palm was the only thing left in the starry sky. Boom! Bufong's mental force formed a defensive force and blocked the palm like a shield. The palm fell, causing the whole starry sky to tremble. Bufong's face turned pale. It was a long time before the fluctuation of the mental force faded away. How overbearing! What a void city! Bufong ate an oyster pancake. The warm energy made Bufong's mental force feel as if it was bathing in the energy of the sun, causing his mental force to recover. At this moment, the minor mental injuries he had suffered were completely healed. However, Bufong now had a clear understanding of this Void City. Void City was overbearing and unreasonable. It was the overlord of this universe. It attacked at the slightest disagreement. The mental force that burst out of the city just now should be the attack of a chaotic saint. Perhaps Bufong did not expect that he would be killed before his mental force could enter the city. If it were any other saint of the Great Path but not Bufong, that person would have been killed. Even a saint of the Great Path would face a slow death if his mental force collapsed. The person who attacked was neither the noblewoman nor the Queen of Curses. If it were the Queen of Curses, Bufong might not have a chance to resist. According to the noblewoman, the Queen of Curses should be in existence beyond the level of a chaotic saint. Bufong turned his head. Behind him, the exiled ancient gods, god kings, and god emperors all knelt in the starry sky, trembling in fear. That exchange just now had scared them badly. A man's name is like a tree shadow. The terror of Void City had long been etched in their minds. It was a place where people were eaten without spitting out the bones. Even an ancient heavenly god would die here. Please spare us. An ancient heavenly god begged Bufong for mercy. However, Bufong just glanced at him coldly. After 100 years of reincarnation, Bufong came to know many things. These people's hands were stained with evil, and even death could not wash away their sins. Those people immediately stopped talking. However, all of them had looks of despair on their faces. Bufong turned to look at Void City again. With a thought, the law of space enveloped everyone. In an instant, a silver light flashed, and they disappeared. After a long time, a stream of black energy rolled over, and countless stars were twisted and shattered. The black energy dissipated. A huge black dragon emerged in midair. It looked very ferocious, somewhat similar to the divine dragons in the myths of the primitive universe. However, terrible power flowed through its body. It turned out to be a black dragon who had reached the level of a saint of the Great Path. The black dragon opened its mouth. A black chain stretched out of it and was pulled by someone's hand. There was a figure standing on the back of the black dragon. It was a woman wearing an ugly devil mask. Her figure was voluptuous, and her aura was extremely fearsome. However, the mask was twisted, and it gave off a nightmarish feeling. You ran so fast. The woman's voice was hoarse, grinding the air like a sandstone. She reached out a hand, which was slender and fair. Then, she made a grabbing motion in the void. Oh, the law of space of the chaotic universe. Have the people of the chaotic universe opened another passage to Void City? However, I can't believe you dare to spy on Void City. You're lucky to run away this time. A sneer seemed to come over the face under the mask. Then, she grabbed the dragon's horn and gave it a hard pull. The black dragon let out a dragon roar. With a twist of its body, it disappeared into the void, turned into a plume of black smoke, and sped toward Void City in a flash. In a place far away from Void City, Bufong landed with a group of people. Some of them were already tortured by the oppressive atmosphere and wanted to flee. However, they were all slapped back by Xiao Bai. Today, Xiao Bai could fight a saint of the Great Path head-on, so these god kings and god emperors were no match for him. Xiao Bai let them go. They are exiles, and being here is basically the same as being exiled. Bufong said. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed, and he nodded as if he understood. Buzz on White E's back, a flag suddenly soared into the sky and instantly fell down. With a poochy sound, it cut the chain into pieces. The faces of these people were wild with joy. They shot out in all directions at a rapid speed. They wanted to escape from here. Bufong's face was indifferent as he watched them leave. Escape? The whole universe is under the control of Void City, and these people can't escape. Bufong shook his head. Just now, when he released his mental force, he could sense that there were countless ancient ships in all directions around Void City. Each of them was burdened with a monstrous aura of blood and looked ferocious. Their purpose was to capture and kill these exiles. Sure enough, the moment these people fled, Bufong found that the ancient ships, which had been quietly floating in the starry sky, began to move. Rumble. Ancient starship after ancient starship flew over from the starry sky and chased after the exiles who were fleeing. Bufong narrowed his eyes and clasped his hands behind his back. He could clearly see bony claws falling from the ancient ship and grabbing those who were trying to flee. An ancient heaven god unleashed his divine power to fight back. Then he collided with the bone claws. In the blink of an eye, the bone claws in the ancient ship were completely shattered. However, this seemed to have angered the expert in the ship. A roar rang out. In an instant, monstrous black smoke billowed into the sky. Many ancient starry sky ships flew over and surrounded the expert in an instant. Slash! Slash! One black chain after another shot out and instantly pierced the expert with thousands of holes. Those white-boned ships were like greedy demons, constantly dragging these people into the ancient starry sky ships. Slash! Slash! The experts who were dragged into the ancient starry sky ship turned into skeletons one after another. In the end, They became members of the ancient starry sky ship. This is the power of the curse. Bufang could not help but click his tongue. He could sense the curse power flowing in those ancient ships. It was these curses that made these ancient ships keep chasing these exiles. Buzz, one ancient ship after another aimed at Bufang. Bufang's eyes narrowed. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. The flag behind him clanked, and a metal spear appeared in his hand. Boom! One ancient ship after another shot toward him at high speed. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes lit up as he slammed the flag down. The spear shot out. One ancient ship after another exploded, and countless white bones flew in all directions. Let's go. Bufang couldn't help but frown as he looked at the densely packed ancient ships that kept coming. There was no end to these ancient ships. Xiao Bai landed next to Bufang. On his shoulders, Xiaopi and Little, who were holding Bufang's head. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Silver light exploded under his feet. The law of space erupted, and he disappeared in a flash. Now that the ancient ships had lost their target, the skeletons on them drifted in the starry sky in confusion. The law of space flickered. Bufang landed in front of the huge void city. He raised his head and looked up sharply. Bufang felt his body convulse. From a distance in the starry sky, it did not look like much. However, it was only when he got closer that he realized how big Void City was. It was just a door, but it almost spanned the whole universe. He could not see the end of it. Standing in front of the door, Bufang looked as small as a speck of dust. It's so huge. Bufang sighed with emotion. Even though he was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked. There was a description of Void City in Heaven God Space's records. However, there was still a huge gap between seeing it with his own eyes and describing it. There were no guards in Void City. Bufang took Xiao Bai and flew into it. Behind the door was a long bridge that stretched as far as the eye could see and was filled with curses. The bridge looked like the spine of a demon, stretching as far as the eye could see. Rumble! A black stream of water flowed under the bridge and rushed into the city like a waterfall. It was shrouded by a pervading mist, bringing with it a mournful and sorrowful aura of death. Black cursed snakes could be seen slithering in the water. Bufang could feel that he could not fly above the stream of water. Once he did, he would very likely be devoured and pulled into the water by those restless cursed snakes. The curse and corrosive power in the water terrified even Bufang. The bridge was really long. Even with Bufang's speed, it took him several days to reach the end. Finally, he set foot on the land of the city. Void City was a city that floated in the universe. It was the largest city in all the universes. It was larger than a planet and vaster than a divine dynasty. Dark steel buildings towered into the sky. Fortunately, there was no longer the terrifying power of the curse when they reached land. Poof! Poof! Bufang turned around. There were still many cursed snakes slithering out of the black water, their eyes fixed on Bufang. Bufang stepped into the city. It was a very vast city. The place where Bufang was standing was only a corner of the city. There were many buildings and houses, including high-rise buildings and low-rise houses. Bufang glanced around. The people in the city were filled with the aura of death, staring at Bufang with lifeless eyes. As a stranger, Bufang came to the city. In these people's eyes, they did not show any emotion. They had no feelings for Bufang. Bufang was too lazy to pay attention to them. For the next few days, Bufang walked around the city. It was a simple city, but it was filled with the aura of death at all times. Here, Bufang could see killings at will. Anyone in the city had the strength of a god, and it was no weaker than the chaotic realms and the chaotic universe. A few days passed. Bufang learned that he was only in a small corner of Void City. The city was divided into 4 districts, A, B, C, and D. Bufang was in District D. District D was the most destitute and chaotic part of the city. It was full of killings and death, and countless people were fighting for resources to survive. The people in District D were basically those who had been exiled by various universes. They had escaped the ancient starship and hid in the outermost region of Void City, struggling at death's door. These people's bodies were all surrounded by the power of the curse, and they were suffering from the torture of the curse. He narrowed his eyes and released the god of cooking's eye. He could see the curse aura emanating from these scrawny men, which floated up and gathered in the outermost layer of the black river of curse. Void City was a place full of evil and sin. At the thought of you living in such a place, Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat. He did not need to think to know that this was a city full of competition. Failing in the competition would mean death. Perhaps I'll have to speed up my search for you. Bu Fong thought to himself seriously. Suddenly, the sky above District D suddenly darkened. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes, raised his hand, and suddenly found that there was a wriggling, cursed snake on his arm, flicking its tongue at him. Chapter 17:03. The wriggling cursed snake kept crawling up Bu Fong's arm. Bu Fong narrowed his eyes. Many people around him were looking at him, as if they were staring at his arm. When they saw the cursed snake wriggling on his arm, they all exhaled as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Bu Fong arched his brows slightly. These people gave him the feeling that this man was also cursed. It would be good if everyone was cursed. The curse appeared out of nowhere and quietly entered Bu Fong's arm. It should be noted that Bu Fong was now a heaven god. Although he was not as strong as a chaotic saint, with the perception of his starry sky mental force, not even the slightest movement could escape his senses, let alone a curse. As the divine power in Bu Fong began to surge. Under Bu Fong's control, it kept covering the curse on his arm. He planned to force the curse out of his arm. Poof, poof. However, under the perception of Bu Fong's mental force, as soon as his divine power got close to the curse, it was corroded and dispersed. What's going on? Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat. This curse power was much stronger than the one in Nethery's body. It's useless. You're cursed by Void City. Your energy will be slowly devoured, unless you can get the food distributed by Void City. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out. Bu Fong paused. He turned his head and saw that the attitude of the people around him had softened a lot because he was cursed. Perhaps they thought that Bu Fong had become one of them. This is the supreme curse of Void City. The curse in District D is the strongest, and the deeper you go, the weaker the power of the curse. The speaker was a middle-aged man. He was as thin as a match, but his bones glowed brilliantly. He said as he stared at Bu Fong, his eyes becoming somewhat hollow. The food distributed by Void City? Bu Fong was stunned. Isn't there no chef in Void City? Where did the food come from? Bu Fong asked. Who told you there are no chefs in Void City? The man gave Bu Fong a puzzled look. He moved and slowly walked towards the center of the city. With every step he took, he felt like he was going to fall apart from exhaustion. Void City is a place of exile for the various universes. The Queen of Curses doesn't care about the lives banished here. She built Void City, and only those who have withstood the curse can survive, Bu Fong said. According to the Queen, this is the self-redemption of those who have been exiled. The power of the curse will continuously devour your divine power. In the end, it will completely drain you of your divine power. The man looked at Bu Fong with pity in his eyes. Bu Fong was stunned. He was actually being pitied. The man didn't say much to Bu Fong. Soon, he blended into the crowd and disappeared in a flash. It was as if he was numbly doing what he was supposed to do. Bu Fong glanced at the curse power on his arm. The power of the curse was indeed growing stronger, corroding his divine power. Every time it corroded, Bu Fong had to spend a lot of his divine power to counteract it. Interesting, the corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. Little Hu tugged at Bu Fong's hair, then raised his little paw and pointed at his short hand. Bu Fong glanced at Little Hu and saw that there was also a black mark on Little Hu's hand. Xiaopi wiggled his buttocks and exposed his little tail, which also had a black curse on it. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed as he scratched his head. Perhaps he was the only one who was not cursed. After all, Xiao Bai was not a living being. Bu Fong walked all the way with Little Hu and Xiaopi, stepping on the ground of District D. This was a dark and evil city, surrounded by piles of corpses. After all, in the city, there were people dying every moment because of the curse. Therefore, the bones were very obvious in this city. They arrived at a place where there was no one. Bufong's mind flickered. With a shake of his hand, an oyster pancake appeared, which he handed to Little Hu and Xiaopi. Bufong also ate one. An oyster pancake entered his stomach. A stream of warm energy rolled up from his abdomen, like an oven, roasting his abdomen. Bufong glanced at the cursed snake on his wrist. The cursed snake seemed to be in great pain. It wriggled for a while, but soon returned to normal. The oyster pancake could suppress the curse, but the effect was not obvious. Bufong nodded. He now had a better understanding of the curse. However, he was not in a hurry to get rid of it. Once the curse was removed, he might not fit in with Void City. At that time, it would be even more difficult to find you. After comforting Xiaopi and Little Hu, Bufong walked out with the two little fellows. Woo! A rumbling sound came from District D. It sounded like the heavy sound of a bugle horn. The sound made the numb people suddenly excited. Like a tide, a group of people rushed madly toward the center of District D. What's going on? Bufong paused. He could feel the change in the emotions of the numb people around him. It was as if the sound of the bugle had aroused the desire in their hearts. One by one, human figures flew past him. Those who could be banished to Void City were not ordinary people. At the very least, their strength and cultivation bases were very strong. There was no lack of saints of the Great Path among them. Bufong followed the crowd and came to the center of District D. There, rows of numb people lined up, as if they were waiting for something. Each of them produced a shabby bowl and held it in their arms, as if they were holding the whole world in their arms. Bufong narrowed his eyes. Standing in the distance, he looked toward the center of the crowd. Little Hu rolled over and stood on top of Bufong's head. Covering his eyes with his paws, he looked into the distance. Oh, that's... When Bufong saw the scene, he froze. The city wall of the central district suddenly opened. One figure after another, tightly wrapped in black armor, walked out at high speed. The numb people gathered in front of the gate, their eyes filled with desire. Rumble! The sound of heavy wheels rumbling echoed through the air. Then, a huge wooden cart was pushed out of District C. The cart was steaming hot, and a strange smell immediately filled the air. Bufong was very sensitive to smells, so he caught the smell in just a flash. It's so strange. It doesn't smell good, but it doesn't smell bad either, Bufong said. Rumble, the wooden cart swayed, and on top of it were numerous black wok. The black wok was huge, like a huge pond, and it was filled with a viscous black liquid. There were also specks of white substance flashing in the black liquid. Bufong's heart skipped a beat. Is this the food of Void City that the man mentioned? An uproar broke out in an instant. It seemed that the food had made these numb people go crazy. They knocked the bowls in their hands. This scene was truly terrifying and shocking. There were many wooden carts, and they were scattered outside the city wall of District C. After thinking for a while, Bufong took out a blue and white porcelain bowl, joined the queue, and came to the front of the cart. One by one, don't rush. His hoarse voice cut one's heart like a knife. On the cart, some stooped old men were stirring the food in the black wok. Bufong's team was marching forward. The people who got their food held their bowls like crazy, hid to the side, reached out their hands, grabbed the food, and stuffed it into their mouths. The black, sticky food gave off a strange smell. Bufong narrowed his eyes. His heart grew heavy as he watched these people enjoy the food. Little Hu was so frightened that she hugged Bufong's head tightly. It was as if she was saying that she did not want to eat this thing. Finally, it was Bufong's turn. With his hands clasped behind his back and a bowl in one hand, Bufong came to the cart. The one-eyed old man who was in charge of scooping food turned his head slightly and stared at Bufong. You're new here? He said, grinning, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Bufong glanced at him and did not say anything. The old man, on the other hand, laughed. His hoarse voice gave people goosebumps. It's delicious. You'll fall in love with this taste, the old man guffawed. Splat! Suddenly, A wooden spoon fell. The black, sticky food fell into Bufong's blue and white porcelain bowl. The viscous food was still flowing slowly. As a newcomer, I'll give you a little discount. I'll give you more to fill your stomach. The old man grinned and stared at Bufong with bright eyes. What is this? Bufong asked, frowning. It was not a delicacy at all. This is the delicacy of Void City. A delicacy that Her Majesty the Queen has given to her servants. The old man said, Rumble, stop chatting. Suddenly, a cold aura spread. Bufong narrowed his eyes, and a sharp black spear suddenly fell toward the old man's neck, as if it was going to pierce a hole in the old man's neck at any time. Your Excellency, please spare my life. The old man hurriedly dropped to his knees and kowtowed to the figure wrapped in black armor. Bufong frowned. Only then did the figure in the armor glance at Bufong, bringing him great pressure. Take the food and scram, the armor guard said. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned and continued his patrol. Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. Carrying the food, he left the wooden cart. The distribution of food continued. The main reason was that there were too many exiles in District D. Bufong walked to a corner with the food. In the distance, a few figures were kneeling on the ground with bowls in their hands, eating crazily. When they were full, they kept licking the bowls as if they were going to break them. They seemed to have noticed Bufong. These people, who had finished their food, raised their heads and stared at Bufong with greed in their eyes. Roar! These people roared and rushed toward Bufong at lightning speed. Eat! Eat! Saliva dripped from their mouths as if they had gone crazy. However, before these people could get close to Bufong, Xiaobai tore their clothes and threw them away. Bufong didn't pay attention to those people. He carefully observed the food in the bowl. The food was flowing slowly, emitting steam. It was like black paint, but there was a little white light in it. Bufong reached out a finger and dipped it into some black mucus. He rubbed it. It was rough like sand. It was boiling hot, which made Bufong feel a little strange. Even with Bufong's cooking skills, he couldn't recognize what it was. Bufong didn't want to eat this kind of thing, but he glanced around. Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. He chose to take a sip. Gulp. His Adam's apple moved. The black liquid flowed into Bufong's mouth. For a moment, it was like a warm feeling enveloped Bufong's mouth. Boom! It seemed like something was going to explode. Bufong's eyes suddenly narrowed because he found that the food in the bowl tasted unexpectedly good. It was a bit like caviar, but the texture was more delicate than caviar. He thought it would be bad, but it was unexpectedly delicious. Buzz. After Bufong ate the food, he suddenly felt that the power of the curse in his body was suppressed a lot. Bufong was stunned. He raised his hand and looked at his wrist. The cursed snake on his wrist was shrinking, as if it had fallen into a deep sleep. The black energy continued to converge on the cursed snake, causing the cursed snake to grow stronger and stronger in its slumber. Bufong's heart suddenly trembled. He directly poured the remaining food in the bowl. Those crazy people suddenly crawled over, constantly licking the food that fell on the ground into their mouths. Bufong's face was a little ugly. This food was simply a slow poison. After eating this food, the cursed snake would only become stronger and stronger, and finally, it would completely kill people. Boom! Suddenly, a terrible wave of energy exploded. Bufong jerked his head up. In the sky, a black divine dragon was meandering. On the back of the divine dragon stood a figure. The figure on the dragon flew across the sky. The woman on the dragon's back glanced indifferently at District D below, revealing a look of disgust and disdain. Then, he rode on the black dragon and flew all the way past District D, heading deeper into the district. It was the woman from before Bufong exhaled. A chaotic saint. Glancing around at the chaotic situation, Bufong felt that he had to find a way to leave District D. Chapter 1704. That woman didn't notice Bufong. Or rather, she didn't pay attention to Bufong. For those who entered District D, there was basically no other way out except death. However, Bufang naturally didn't want to stay here. There must be something fishy about that food, which would make the curse stronger. For these people, eating that food was equivalent to committing slow suicide. Bufang took out an oyster pancake and stuffed it into his mouth. As soon as the oyster pancake entered his stomach, the cursed snake on his wrist shrieked. Like snow melting, a layer of it melted. Bufang left with little Hu in Xiaopi. District D and District C were separated by a huge city wall. To leave District D, they had to cross the city wall and enter District C. The distribution of food didn't last long. Soon, the wooden carts returned to District C. Those who had finished eating also became numb and left the vicinity of the city wall. Bufang walked around the city wall. The city walls towered into the clouds, and when he raised his head, he could not see through them at all. They brought him great pressure. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back and walked around the city wall. He wanted to find an entrance to District C. However, he was soon disappointed. The city wall didn't seem to be made of stones. It was so solid that there were no cracks on it. Boom! A wave of air rushed over. A figure in black armor landed. Bufang was stunned. After the man in black armor landed, he surrounded Bufang. "Why are you sneaking around?" The figure in the armor spoke. The sharp spear was pointed at Bufang. A terrifying chill started to spread. Bufang frowned. It seemed that his action of walking around the city wall had attracted the attention of these guards. He couldn't tell if these guards were men or women. These guards didn't talk nonsense with Bufang. They directly attacked. The spear with a terrible aura kept falling. Bufang furrowed his brows. Zhang Xian thought. Bufang's spiritual energy suddenly descended and shrouded the surrounding heaven and earth. Facing the incoming spear, Bufang raised his hand and flicked his finger, directly flicking the spear away. The guard was not weak, probably as strong as a new saint of the Great Path. Void City was indeed domineering to have a saint of the Great Path as a guard. However, with Bufang's current strength, it was easy for him to deal with these guards. With the help of Xiao Bai and Bufang, these guards were killed in a short while. The law of destruction circulated, and the explosive power surged. Bufang approached one of the guards and asked, "Let me ask you a question. Do you know where your cursed goddesses are? How dare you covet the cursed goddess? You will be sentenced to death." The guard said coldly, "Let me change the question. If I want to enter District C, how do I get in?" Bufang thought for a while and asked. The guard still gritted his teeth and refused to answer. "You can't get in. Once you enter Void City, you'll have to rot and die there. This is your destiny." The guard said coldly, his voice somewhat crazy. Bufang frowned. He knew there was a way to enter District C, but the guard refused to tell him. Wait a minute, Bufang narrowed his eyes. If he wanted to enter District C, perhaps he could only wait until the next time the food was distributed. At that time, the city gates would open, and he would have a chance to enter. The laws of time spread out, turning into chains that bound up these guards. Bufang left the guards behind and was about to leave. Suddenly, Bufang paused and looked into the distance. There, a stooped old man was waiting for him. "Young man, do you want to enter District C?" The stooped old man squinted at Bufang. Bufang recognized him. He was the old man who had distributed the food before. "You didn't enter District C?" Bufang asked, puzzled. "I'm waiting for you," the old man said with a fanatical look in his eyes. "Waiting for me?" Bufang was puzzled. The old man gave him a strange feeling. "I know you want to enter District C, and I know the only way to do so." The old man grinned, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. "I need you to promise me one thing, and I'll tell you the way to enter." Bufang glanced at the old man, as if he was weighing the feasibility of the plan. Suddenly, Bufang raised his hand. The law of space swirled around him. In the next moment, it wrapped around the old man's body and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was in another part of District D. A group of guards landed at the spot where he had dealt with the guard, sealing off the area. These guards are under the rule of the Queen of Curses. Fortunately, you didn't kill them. Otherwise, the Queen of Curses would definitely hunt you down. If you kill a guard, you'll be tainted with a curse that you can't get rid of, the old man said. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing his bony arms. Just like this, the old man's arm was covered in scars, and each scar cut off one of his tendons. I sense a familiar aura from your body, the old man said with some nostalgia. A familiar aura? Bufong was stunned. What kind of aura did he have that this old man would be familiar with? There's only one way to enter District C, and that's to charge through the Death Gate. The old man said, as long as you pass through the Death Gate, you can enter District C. Once you reach District C, many things will be easy to handle. You are not familiar with this place, so you will need a qualified guide, such as me. The old man volunteered. Bufong did not reject the old man. Instead, he stared at him calmly. Why should I believe you? Give me a reason to believe you, Bufong said with his hands clasped behind his back. The old man took a deep breath. After a moment of silence, he turned to Bufong and said, it was once a chef. The Death Gate. As the name suggested, it was a gate of certain death. In Void City, there was a death gate between every district. The only way for the lowly people to gain more freedom and status was to charge through the death gate. However, for countless years, no one had been able to charge through the death gate. In District C, a vast square was set up. Armored guards could be seen walking in the square. However, compared to District D, the guards in District C were much more relaxed. Some of the guards even poked their heads out, and they turned out to be beautiful women with long, flowing hair. A dragon roar rang out. The mighty black dragon descended. Its terrible aura attracted the attention of many people in the square. Compared to the dead world of District D, District C looked more like a real city with vitality. In District C, there were cursed people, ordinary people, and even nobles. In the Count's mansion, it was a building that towered into the sky like a sharp knife. The Countess' mansion was the biggest ruler of District C. Of course, it was under the control of the Queen of Curses. The woman on the back of the black dragon dismounted, and the enormous black dragon suddenly transformed into a human figure wrapped in a black robe, following behind the woman. As the woman entered the Count's mansion, a large group of nobles walked out of the mansion, laughing heartily. "Welcome back, Countess Xiaqiu." The nobles bowed. The woman nodded faintly and said nothing more. The maids stepped forward with goblets in their hands. There was a bubbling liquid flowing within the goblets. Countess Xiaqiu took the goblet, drank it in one gulp, and pursed her red lips. Her cheeks flushed, and she burped. Suddenly, a golden-haired guard flew over. When he saw Countess Xiaqiu, he said with a look of disbelief, "Your Excellency, I've detected that someone is trying to break through the Death Gate." As soon as the guard's words rang out, all the nobles present were shocked. "Oh, there are still people who dare to break through the Death Gate in District D? How rare. It's been years since I've seen a good show. The people in District D are all disgusting lowlifes who have been banished. They're all cannon fodder raised by the Queen. How dare they break through the Death Gate?" The nobles were talking among themselves. Countess Xiaqiu handed the goblet to her maid and raised her eyebrows slightly. "Breaking through the Death Gate. Interesting. Let's go and have a look," she said. Countess Xiaqiu said. After that, she took the lead and walked away. The black-robed man, who was the Black Dragon, followed behind her. The nobles bumped into the Black Dragon and retreated in fear. District D was the Death Gate to District C. It was a deep passage. A group of nobles surrounded Countess Xiaqiu and came to a huge coliseum. The coliseum was circular, and the seats were arranged in a picturesque manner. The nobles sat down one after another. They whispered to each other and talked. Countess Xiaqiu was very domineering. She stood in the middle, raised her hand, and a wisp of black light burst out. Buzz, an image immediately emerged in the center of the Colosseum. In the image, there was a strange combination. A thin young man dressed in a striped red and white chef's robe. A fox and a mantis shrimp were perched on the young man's shoulders. Behind the young man was a puppet made of metal. At the side of the puppet, there was a hunchbacked old man walking. The appearance of this strange combination immediately caused an uproar among the nobles. "Oh, it's this old man. Why is this stinky chef still alive? It's been tens of thousands of years, and he's still struggling at death's door. TSK. No wonder someone is trying to break through the death gate. Was he tricked by this old man again? The nobles laughed. In their eyes, the person who was tricked by the old man to break through the death gate must be a reckless newbie. Countess Xiaoqio's eyes were somewhat complicated. She glanced at the stooped old man, and then her face was filled with killing intent. Well, it's rare for someone to break through the death gate. Everyone, place your bets, she said. After saying that, he snapped his fingers. Immediately, options emerged in front of the nobles. Seeing these options, the nobles immediately clamored wildly. In these boring days, someone was trying to break through the death gate. This kind of exciting thing excited them. There were not many options, only 3 in total. Because there were only 3 stages in the death gate, the nobles bet on how many stages the challenger could break through. The nobles of District C looked excited. They all placed their bets on their choices with the bets they had obtained from Countess Xiaoqio's maidservants. Crush these disgusting bugs of District D to death. Haha, it's best to tear them apart piece by piece. That'll be more exciting. We must kill this stinky chef this time. He has lived for tens of thousands of years, so Countess Xiaoqio definitely wants him dead. The nobles roared. Amidst their roars, the scene in the death gate gradually began to play. Suddenly, a maidservant landed beside Countess Xiaoqio. The countess was slightly taken aback. What did you say? A cursed goddess has come to District C? Countess Xiaoqio frowned. She did not understand why a cursed goddess, who should stay in District A, would come to District C. However, she breathed a sigh of relief when she heard someone call her a cursed goddess. Once upon a time, she was also called a cursed goddess. Unfortunately, she shook her head and threw the thought out of her head. Then, she turned to look into the distance. The noisy nobles also quietened down. In the distance, a pitch-black ship was slowly sailing over. As the ship sailed past, ripples seemed to appear in the void. At the front of the black ship were 2 figures. The leader was a girl with long black hair and a beautiful face. The power of curses swirled around her, making her look noble and imposing. Beside the young lady stood a noble woman with a gentle smile on her face. Welcome, goddess. Welcome, duchess. Countess Xiaoqio bowed respectfully toward the black ship. The nobles were shocked, and they bowed one after another. At this moment, in the fighting pit, the death gate had begun. Chapter 1705. The Death Pass. It was located in a very inconspicuous corner of District D. If it weren't for the stooped old man leading him, Bufong might not have found it. No, it should be said that the only entrance to District C was in this place. Rumble. They passed through the stone door. As they walked further in, they saw black water flowing on the ground, which was filled with the power of curses. The water was cold and biting, like the water of the Acheron River that could freeze the soul of a person. The stooped old man led Bufong to the front. This is a secret passage. A woman once told me about it. Unfortunately, I fail when I try to break through it. The stooped old man said to Bufong. There seemed to be a little loneliness in his tone. The Death Pass was a sad place for him. You're strong, not bad among the saints of the Great Path, but it's still a little difficult for you to pass the Death Pass. The stooped old man turned around and glanced at Bufong. Bufong twitched the corner of his mouth and did not say anything. The old man was also a chef. When he mentioned this, Bufong was a little surprised. However, the old man only said that the past was unbearable, and he did not talk too much with Bufong. Their main goal was to pass the Death Pass. There are 3 Death Passes in total. Isn't that too few? The old man chuckled, revealing his yellow teeth. Bufong paused. This old man was really out of place with the people of District D. At least, he was much more emotional than them. He liked to smile. I passed the first 2 passes but failed at the 3rd. I hope you won't repeat my mistake. The old man said, I really hope you can pass the Death Pass and take me to District C. There seemed to be tears in the old man's eyes. Only when I enter District C can I see that man. Bufong nodded. The old man told him the location, and he would take him to District C. This was an equivalent exchange. Xiaobai followed behind Bufong. Little Hu held Bufong's head and kept squeaking. The first stage is here, the old man suddenly said. Bufong was stunned. Their footsteps came to a halt, and they stopped in their tracks. Around the Colosseum, the nobles who were watching immediately became excited. Oh, it had begun. Be obedient and tear them apart. Even if I bet on them, they won't be able to pass the first round. Brainlessly betting on this lowly person to lose. The nobles roared and craned their necks to stare at the screen. Countess Xia Xiu glanced at the nobles and exhaled. Nethery's eyes were indifferent as she stared at the scene. No one could tell what she was thinking. The noblewoman, on the other hand, was quite interested. Her red lips curled up as if she was looking forward to something. Boom! In the death pass, Bufong's mental power spread out in all directions. It was on the ground. A cold sound of collision rang out from the flowing black water. Slowly, a figure in black armor emerged. The figure was wrapped in black bandages and clad in shabby armor. His aura fluctuated, and his cultivation base seemed to have reached the peak of the saint of the Great Path. Just the aura alone was enough to cause the entire passageway to rumble. Be careful. This is the cursed Lich King. The old man hurriedly reminded Bufong. The filthy Demon King. Bufong paused. Then he realized that it was not the filthy Demon King. Roar. The filthy Demon King roared. His body was permeated with the infinite curse power, which made his strength reach the peak of the saint of the Great Path. Rumble. The Lich King moved very fast, and in a flash, he was closing in on Bufong. Don't touch his body. You will be entangled by the curse power and die instantly. Bufong's heart skipped a beat when he sensed the curse power. Boom! The Lich King was bound. Although he couldn't use his magic power, his physical body was his greatest weapon. Every time he attacked, he would corrode the ground and form a deep pit. After a few moves, the ground was full of corrosive pits. Xiaobai stood in the distance, his mechanical eyes flashing. Little Hu and Xiaopi left Bufong's shoulders and lay down beside Xiaobai. The stooped old man clenched his fists excitedly. Swoosh! The vermilion robe fluttered, and Bufong landed on the last floor in the passage. He was surrounded by the corrosive curse power. This boy can't escape. Tear him to pieces. Tear his body to pieces. Is this boy so weak? He can't even pass the first level. What a waste of my bet. The nobles were even more nervous than Bufong. Some people who bet on Bufong to pass the first 2 levels held their heads in frustration and cursed viciously. Some people laughed excitedly, as if they could already see the Lich King tearing Bufong to pieces. Countess Xia Qiu glanced at you. Aren't you going to bet, goddess? She said with a smile. Nethery shook her head and didn't say anything. The noblewoman smiled and said, You guys have fun. We're just here to watch. We'll go back soon. The queen values goddess very much and was afraid that she would be under too much pressure, so she asked me to bring her out to relax. The noblewoman glanced at you, then turned to look at the scene in the fighting pit. The smile on her face grew wider. Countess Xiaqiu seemed to understand something, and a sneer came over the corner of her mouth. She glanced at you, then turned to focus on the situation in the passage, and said no more. Of course, Bufong did not know that he had become the focus of many people's attention. The Lich King, who was at the peak of the saint of the Great Path in front of him, made Bufong a little wary. In this passage, all energy seemed to be suppressed, so he could only use his physical strength. This was not good news for Bufong. He glanced around and saw that he was surrounded by the corrosive curse power. He took a deep breath. The Lich King was trying to force him into a corner and then slowly torture him to death. How sinister. In the face of the Lich King, who was approaching step by step, the terrible curse power seemed to corrode the void. Bufong turned his head and looked at Little Hu in the distance. Little Hu, come here. Bufong beckoned. Lying on Xiaobai's head, Little Hu froze and his eyes widened. He quickly shook his head. Bufong's face grew serious, and he gave Little Hu a serious look. The latter's first seemed to stand on end. With a swoosh, he landed on Bu Fong's shoulder. He seemed a little reluctant. Good boy. Bu Fong rubbed Little Hu's head. Then, with Little Hu in his arms, he aimed at the Lich King in the distance, raised his hand, and gently slapped Little Hu on the buttocks. Little Hu straightened his neck, puffed up his mouth, and spat out a soul demon meatball. The soul demon meatball was too fast. It shot out in an instant. Then it hit the Lich King. With a rumble, the Lich King was knocked flying backward and fell hard to the ground. The Lich King crawled to his feet. One of his arms was broken. The stooped old man paused. He didn't expect that Bu Fong could do this. Keep spitting, Bu Fong said faintly, then gently slapped Little Hu on the buttocks again. Little Hu opened his mouth, and golden light shot out in all directions. The dark and gloomy tunnel was lit up. One soul demon meatball after another shot out and instantly engulfed the Lich King, who was crawling up from the ground. Boom, boom, boom. Explosions rang out incessantly, and the whole passage trembled. The next moment, the Lich King turned into a pile of minced meat on the ground. The minced meat wriggled, but it would take a lot of time for him to recover. And that time was enough for Bu Fong and the others to pass the first level. Bu Fong held Little Hu in his arms. Little Hu's mouth was spewing hot air as he burped. It's not too difficult. It's very easy. Bu Fong rubbed Little Hu's head. The stench of the Lich King's rotting body, mixed with the smell of the exploding soul demon meatballs, formed a strange smell. Little Hu couldn't help but sneeze. The stooped old man didn't know what to say. He had been humiliated. Back then, when he tried to pass this level, he almost lost his life. Bu Fong's relaxed attitude made him feel a little sad. With Little Hu in tow, Bu Fong and the others passed the first level. The nobles who saw this scene through the screen were dumbfounded. How could there be such a thing? The Lich King's body was entangled with the power of the curse. Whether it was a hand-to-hand fight or the approach of divine power, it would cause the corrosion. However, some of the nobles who had bet on Bu Fong began to complain in annoyance. After the initial shock, these nobles stared at Bu Fong. They wanted to know how Bu Fong would pass the second level. However, the corners of these nobles' mouths twitched, as if they had a bad feeling. Da-da-da-da. Little Hu opened his mouth and breathed out wildly. Hot air gushed out, and smoke filled the air. A huge, rotting crocodile in front of him was directly blown through. Bu Fong pinched Little Hu's little mouth and leisurely stepped through the second level. Xiaopi was lying on Xiao Bai's head. Its mechanical eyes flashed, and it followed behind Bu Fong. The so-called death level was very easy. Looking at Bu Fong's back, the old man was speechless. Was this cheating? Maybe. Little Hu ran around on Bu Fong's shoulder. She seemed very excited and happy. She felt that all this was very interesting. It's the third level. The old man suddenly became serious. He looked at Bu Fong, and his eyes suddenly surged with hope. In the third level, you must listen to me. Otherwise, you will never pass. Back then, it was at this stage that I made the wrong choice. The old man said to Bu Fong. Bu Fong turned his head in confusion and glanced at the old man. The old man's eyes were full of hope. He didn't want to fail. Once he failed, he would have to wait for tens of thousands of years. The sea would dry up, and the rocks would rot. He was confident that he could pass the third level because he had experience. We'll see. Bu Fong curled his lips and said nothing. The group stepped into the dark cave. The third level finally appeared in front of them. Countess Xiao did not expect that they would really make it to the third level. Unfortunately, the third level was the most difficult, for no other reason than that it was almost an unsolvable level for a chef. Tap, 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 a gust of fragrant wind surged. Countess Xiao turned her head and looked to her side. There, the noblewoman's gentle face emerged. It's been tens of thousands of years. That guy's body has decayed into an old man, but he still hasn't given up, the noblewoman said. Countess Xiao did not speak. Back then, I was also responsible for guiding you. This scene is really interesting. The noblewoman covered her mouth and chuckled. Her chest rose and fell as she laughed. Countess Xia Qiu frowned. The noblewoman smiled and turned her head. Her beautiful face appeared in front of Countess Xia Qiu. Little Xia Qiu, when I guided you, I met that old man. But when I guided you, I met the young chef who is challenging the third level. Don't you think it's interesting? The noblewoman said with a smile. Countess Xia Qiu paused, then her pupils constricted. The passage of the third level was very dark. It was so dark that one could not even see their own fingers. Moreover, their mental force could not be spread. Bufang stepped down. Suddenly, specks of green light slowly floated up, like fireflies flying in the sky, constantly gathering. It was a beautiful scene. Soon, the countless fireflies gathered to form a graceful and luxurious figure. Just by hovering there, the figure gave off an incomparably terrible aura. The Queen of Curses? Bufang frowned. When the hunchbacked old man saw this scene, he sucked in a breath of cold air. Bufang, the next choice. You must not choose cooking. The Queen of Curses hates chefs the most. You must not choose cooking. The old man cried out. However, as soon as his voice rang out, it was gone in an instant as if it had been stripped out of Bufang's world. Oh, don't choose cooking. Bufang frowned. Buzz, the figure made of ghostly green fluorescent light, stared at Bufang with a dignified expression. Then it slowly spoke. Brave warrior who dares to challenge the death level. Make your choice. Buzz, as soon as its voice rang out, brilliant light shone. Two choices immediately appeared in front of Bufang. Chapter 1706. There were two choices in front of Bufang. Yes, they had appeared out of thin air. However, they did not appear in the form of words. Bufang felt that the ghostly green woman in front of him seemed to be peeking into his heart. A buzzing sound rang out. Two choices emerged, one on the left and one on the right. On the left was a kitchen knife and a wok, which should be used for cooking. Bufang was not surprised. On the right, a graceful figure appeared. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, and her dress seemed to ripple in the wind. Although he could not see her face clearly, there was no doubt that it represented a woman. The nobles who were watching these scenes almost went crazy. I can't believe someone made it to the third level. I can't believe that old fellow really found someone who can make it to the third level. It's a familiar scene, and it's a choice again. I wonder what the young man will choose. The nobles kept clamoring. At this moment, Countess Xiaqiu made another bet. Such an exciting event naturally stimulated the nobles present, and they all placed their bets on the energy disk in midair. Of course, he'll choose a beauty. If he doesn't choose a woman, will he choose to cook? There's no point in betting like this. The nobles did not know what to say. However, although there was no suspense, they would not give up this opportunity. They all placed their bets on women, which was normal. Why did the young man make the challenge? He must be looking for someone. Otherwise, why would he go through so much trouble to enter Void City? And why would he risk his life to challenge the death challenge? Most importantly, in Void City, the Queen of Curses hated chefs the most. Yu's eyes flashed as she looked indifferently at the scene in the fighting pit. Do you want to bet, goddess? The noblewoman asked with a smile, looking at you. She seemed to be happy to see this. You glanced at the noblewoman. Countess Xiaqiu got the hint and asked someone to exchange a lot of bets for her. Nethery took the wager and didn't say anything. She directly bet on her cooking skills. Countess Xiaqiu froze, the noblewoman froze, and all the nobles present froze. As expected of a curse goddess, she really knows how to play and has the guts to bet that the young man will choose cooking. I'm afraid you'll feel despair later. In Void City, who would dare to choose cooking? The noblewoman was stunned for a moment before she chuckled. She directly placed her bet on the opposite side of you. For a time, the bets were one-sided. You bet on Bufang's culinary skills alone. As for the others, they all chose Bufang to choose women. Phew, so exciting. Many nobles were stunned. If Bufang really chose cooking, it would really be playing with people's hearts. You didn't say anything. She just looked at the scene with an indifferent expression. As for why she chose it, It was purely her intuition. Don't choose cooking. The words of the hunchbacked old man still lingered in Bufong's ears. He did not understand why the old man strongly urged him not to choose cooking. At this moment, Bufong finally understood. It was a suicidal question. The Queen of Curses hated cooking. If he chose cooking, he might really anger her and put her through all kinds of torturous tests. If he chose women, he did not know what the consequences would be, but it should not be that easy. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufong looked at the two choices. Little Hu and Xiaopi were lying on his shoulder. One was holding its little paws, and the other was spitting bubbles. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. The purpose of Bufong's trip to Void City was to find you. So, he had to choose between cooking and women. Was there need to ask? He had to choose cooking. Without thinking, Bufong flicked his finger. Energy shot out and landed on the cooking column. As someone who wanted to become the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, how could he not choose cooking and choose something else? There was no doubt that Bufong had made his choice. Cooking. Buzz, the light flashed and engulfed Bufong in an instant. The hunchbacked old man's eyes froze, then turned gloomy. Why don't young people listen to the advice of old people nowadays? The hunchbacked old man was a little annoyed. After choosing cooking, what he would face next was the most terrible and cruel torture. There was no hope left. The hunchbacked old man despaired. He sensed the same aura in Bufong, but Bufong had disappointed him. He had been so persistent in the past. But what was the result? He had nothing now. He tried to persuade Bufong, but Bufong did not take his words seriously at all. His purpose of entering District C and meeting that man had completely disappeared. He had waited for 10,000 years for a man like Bufong, but this guy chose cooking, Sai. The nobles were stunned. Cooking? They watched helplessly as Bufong chose cooking. The energy poured down, shattering the cooking scene. Everyone felt their hearts twitch. It was as if what was broken was not the picture, but their bet. Boom! In an instant, all the nobles went crazy. What kind of person is he? He's courting death. This young man is dead meat. Even if he enters District C, I'll fight him to the death. These nobles would never have thought that Bufong would really choose cooking. The Queen of Curses had singled out chefs she hated, but someone was still so bold as to choose cooking. He was courting death. Countess Xiaqiu paused and frowned slightly. The noblewoman was still smiling faintly. Wow, the goddess was right. She's going to make a big profit this time. The noblewoman said in a teasing tone. Yu's face was still expressionless, as if what happened had nothing to do with her. Countess Xiaqiu's expression was somewhat complicated. Looking at the upright young man in the picture, she suddenly felt as if she was looking at a man from tens of thousands of years ago. At that time, that man also chose cooking without hesitation and then regretted it to this day. Was the same thing going to happen again? Every reenactment was a torment and shock to her soul. The scene in front of him changed. Bufong found himself in a dark and gloomy place. It was a kitchen. Bufong glanced around and found something fishy. Yes, it was a kitchen, but it was a little different from a normal kitchen. Buzz, the ghostly green figure of the queen, emerged. The empress sat high above as if she was sitting on a throne. She crossed her legs and looked down at Bufong. Since you've chosen cooking, you'll have to take the cooking test. If you want to enter District C, you'll have to defeat the chefs of Void City in a cooking competition. Her cold voice echoed through the whole place. Bufong frowned. Sure enough, it's a cooking competition, but soon Bufong's brows relaxed. When had he ever been afraid of a cooking competition? If you win the cooking competition, you can enter District C. If you lose, your soul will be extracted and sealed in Void City forever, becoming its slave for generations to come. The queen's voice rang out. Bufong focused his eyes. The price of failure was too cruel. Compared to this price, death was nothing. However, since Bufong had made the choice, he would not give up. I see, Bufong replied. Buzz, a rumbling sound rang out. Then, the door of the kitchen opened. A wooden cart slowly drove over and piled up in front of the kitchen. Tap, 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 the crisp sound of footsteps rang out. Bu Fong turned and looked into the distance. There, a handsome figure slowly walked in with his hands clasped behind his back. It was a grayish-white figure. As he looked at him, Bu Fong frowned. A sense of déjà vu rose in his heart. Roar! Outside the kitchen, a clamor rang out incessantly. Bu Fong knew very well that it was the frenzy of those numb people in District D when they learned that there was food. Conquer these people. Use your cooking skills to conquer them. There are 1,000 exiles here. Cook your own dishes, and whoever attracts the most diners will win. The rule was not complicated. However, Bu Fong felt a great pressure. The young man in front of him was proud and confident, and he emanated an aura that was exactly the same as Bu Fong's. Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat. Is he the system's former host? Bu Fong thought to himself. However, what Bu Fong did not know was outside the kitchen, the stooped old man knelt on the ground. His face was already covered with tears, and he was sobbing uncontrollably. The heart-wrenching grief moved anyone who heard it. No one knew what he was grieving about. Buzz, with a flicker of his mind, the dragon bone kitchen knife and the black turtle constellation wok fell into Bu Fong's hands. Bu Fong's eyes were indifferent. He was also confident and proud, which was a strong belief in his cooking skills. Bu Fong looked outside the kitchen at those fanatical people. They were crazy about that strange food. The man in front of him chuckled. He glanced at Bu Fong. Then he meticulously changed into a chef's robe and washed himself with clean water. The knife was like an ice crystal, and the wok was like a glaze. This man seemed to be obsessed with cleanliness as he cooked. The cooking competition began in an instant. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. However, as soon as the cooking competition began, Bu Fong was stunned. The man's movement made him a little dazed. Swish, the man stretched out his hand. His clean hand suddenly fell into the void. Boom! In front of the man, there seemed to be a surging black river. It was the river of curses. It was the river of curses which surrounded District D. The man reached his hand into the river of curses, not caring that it was dirty. With a swish, strange insects crawled all over his hand. They were disgusting insects that lived in the curse and darkness. They crawled toward the man's hand. Bu Fong furrowed his brows. This fellow was cooking. The man's face was stiff. He looked at those insects with disgust and disgust. Then the power in his arm shook. The bugs immediately dropped to the ground, covered in the black curse. Buzz, the man's other hand held the ice crystal knife, and in a flash he slashed. Sizzle, sizzle. Black droplets kept splashing out. Those were the droplets from the insects' bodies. One by one, the insects were cut. In just a flash, the man had slashed tens of thousands of times, cutting each insect in half. His knife skill was enough to give Bu Fong some experience. However, what shocked Bu Fong even more was yet to come. The man grinned, showing an excited smile. Those droplets fell into the glass wok. The wok kept expanding, and the droplets filled the entire wok. Broken insect corpses, dirty curses, and turbid juice were mixed in the wok. The man's hand shook. He grabbed a ladle, which emitted a dazzling light, and threw it into the wok. The dark green flame was burning. As the ladle stirred, the juice in the wok became more and more turbid. The man's face became more ferocious. Roar! Outside the door, the people of District D, who were waiting for food, roared crazily. It was a roar of excitement. It was a roar that could shake people's minds. Bu Fong's face changed. He seemed to have thought of something. He looked at the wok that the man was stirring, and his eyes shrank to the size of a sesame seed. Because the liquid in the glass wok slowly became sticky, bits of white substance floated on top of the viscous liquid. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. He raised his hand, covering his mouth. Damn it, was this the legendary dark cuisine? Chapter 1707. Bu Fong covered his mouth with his hand. So, that was how the food was cooked. The ingredient was actually an insect from the River of Curses. Bu Fong had never seen such a simple and crude cooking method. As a chef who loved delicious food, Bufong was a little obsessed with cleanliness. He liked cleanliness, just like the man's performance. But the contrast between the man's performance was too big. The insect crawled on his arm, and when it wriggled, it gave him a scalp numb and a creepy feeling, which made Bufong feel a little depressed. Roar. Roars came from outside the kitchen. They came from the 1,000 exiles who had been chosen by District D. Bufong had seen the fanaticism and craziness of those exiles for this dark cuisine. From the very beginning, this cooking competition was unfair. Bufong was on the side that was absolutely crushed. At this moment, Bufong, whose mind was shaken, was a little confused. He was still savoring the disgusting taste of the dark cuisine. Of course, for a moment, Bufong couldn't think of any dish or delicacy that could defeat this dark cuisine. He wanted the exiles of District D, who had long been attracted by the dark cuisine, to choose his food. I lost. With tears in his eyes, the stooped old man looked at the scene. He could empathize with Bufong's confusion. Not too long ago, he had also been at a loss like this. Then he had completely failed, completely and utterly lost. Looking at the man, the stooped old man's face was very complicated. This was him, who he used to be. That was his past. However, he was imprisoned by the Queen of Curses and sealed in this death pass for generations to come. The Queen of Curses, the stooped old man, clenched his fists. However, a wisp of dark curse rose, making his whole body convulse in pain. Blurg, this food is too disgusting. Only the disgusting insects of District D would eat this thing. This is a reward from a queen. It can suppress the curse. They should be grateful. The nobles also saw the man's cooking, and their expressions changed. Some of them even covered their mouths with an ugly expression. Indeed, this kind of cooking had a huge impact on them, although they already knew how to cook this kind of food. However, every time they looked at it, they would feel nauseous from the depths of their bodies. That was why they looked down on the people of District D. In their eyes, the people of District D who ate this kind of food were like ants and worms. Although it's disgusting, there's no doubt this chef can't beat this food. Some nobles smiled and shook their heads, although they had lost the bet, but it didn't stop them from winning in the following bets. The bet was also initiated by Countess Xia Qiu, and the winner and loser of the bet would be chosen. The question was whether Bufong could win. Without a doubt, these nobles all bet that Bufong would lose. No one could beat this kind of food. It was a temptation from the soul. Like a poison, it made the insects of District D crazy with love. He was very indifferent. She looked at Bufong, and her expression didn't change. It was as if nothing could cause her expression to change. She had long been indifferent to everything. The noblewoman, on the other hand, was smiling with great interest. I'm looking forward to how this little guy will deal with it. If he can't, he'll be better off dead than alive. The noblewoman chuckled. What kind of food should Bufong cook? No one knew what Bufong would choose. Although they were not chefs, if they put themselves in his shoes, they could only despair. Those people were attracted by this dark cuisine, and it was impossible for them to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Bufong also felt great pressure. He had never expected this dark cuisine to appear. Bufong had tasted a small bite of it, but it was just a small bite. After that, Bufong didn't dare to taste more. It was a kind of food that worked on the soul level, something that could make those people crazy. For Bufong, it was a dark cuisine, but for the exiled people of District D, it might be a real delicacy. It's like trying to change a stereotype. It's really hard. Habits were the most terrifying, not to mention crazy, brainless habits. From the beginning, choosing to cook was destined to fail. Bufong furrowed his brows and thought carefully. He had to come up with a countermeasure. In fact, cooking was not absolute. It was just a matter of whether Bufong could think of it or not. He touched his chin. Bufong's mind moved. With a buzz, he sank into the heaven and earth farmland. Cattle and sheep could be seen in the wind. The heaven and earth farmland was as beautiful as ever. It was quiet and leisurely. Neo-Han-san was lying on a recliner, enjoying the comfortable wind and sleeping soundly. Bufong's appearance woke him up. As the father of hybridization, Neo-Han-san, Bufong felt that he might have a better way to deal with the dark cuisine. After all, this guy might be a bastard who had stuffed the heavenly Tao into his ingredients. Therefore, Bu Fong talked to Niu Han San about the current situation. There's such a thing? They actually dare to use dark cuisine in front of Ownerbu? Niu Han San was a little shocked. Niu Han San got up, pacing back and forth in front of the wooden hut. Bu Fong also thought for a while. Suddenly, Niu Han San slammed his fist. Ownerbu, the reason why those exiles like that dark cuisine, why? Isn't it because that dark cuisine can suppress their curse? Although it's a slow, suicidal poison, the cultivation base of these exiled people should not be weak. It's impossible that they can't sense it, so I think, Ownerbu, don't think too much. Just break it with brute force. I just need to make a delicacy that can break the curse on these people. Niu Han San said. Bu Fong's eyes lit up. Against dark cuisine, I will use absolute delicacies to crush it completely. Niu Han San said. Then, this guy wiggled his butt and went into the small house. A few moments later, he handed a bag to Bu Fong. Bu Fong paused for a moment, then took the bag. Inside the bag were grains of beans. The perfectly round beans were of different colors, and they had all kinds of colors. What's this? Bu Fong was puzzled. Ownerbu, this is this old bull's latest masterpiece. Each of these beans has fused with the great path, the law, the power of soul demons, the power of curses, and all kinds of other powers. Niu Han San rubbed his hands. I wanted to wait for Ownerbu to have time to study it together. But now I'll give you these beans. This is a supreme-grade ingredient. Niu Han San said confidently. He did not get the title of the father of hybridization for nothing. Bu Fong had thrown a lot of things into the farmland. As Bu Fong's strength improved, he had thrown in all kinds of strange ingredients. In addition to being eaten by Bu Fong, many other ingredients were used and studied by Niu Han San. Bu Fong raised his eyebrows and glanced at Niu Han San. This guy is really different from others. Did he fuse the different powers of different universes together? A hodgepodge? Yes, but not exactly, because this hodgepodge was just a hodgepodge of powers, and there was only one ingredient. Bu Fong nodded. Suddenly, he was looking forward to it. It was just as Niu Han San had said. He could defeat everything with brute force. No matter what trick he used, he could just break it with brute force. Bu Fong's fingers dug into the beans, and he couldn't help but look forward to seeing the rainbow-colored beans. Let's go, Bu Fong said. The next moment, he left the farmland. Niu Han San crossed his feet and hummed a song leisurely. The father of hybridization is awesome. Bu Fong had returned. He opened his eyes, and a bag of beans appeared in his hand. The bamboo hat inside was colorful. Bu Fong focused his eyes and glanced at the man in the distance. The latter's dark cuisine was almost complete. Bu Fong exhaled, no longer hesitating. He poured all the beans out, and they fell into the blue and white porcelain bowl, soaking in the spring of life. Boom! All of a sudden, the air crackled. Bu Fong took out the heavy, pitch-black turtle constellation walk. This time, he wanted to make a bean delicacy. Without a doubt, he had made up his mind. The black turtle's roar echoed, making Bu Fong's aura rise continuously. His eyes focused. With a flick of his finger, the divine flame jumped out. The scarlet divine flame fell under the black turtle constellation wok. Bu Fong put all the beans into the wok and cooked them. Gurgle! The colorful beans were boiling, and each one was tumbling. The divine flame seeped into the beans. Soon, a thread of fire appeared in the center of each bean, throbbing. After a while, steam rose into the air. Bu Fong poured the water away. With a swishing sound, the Qilin transmigration ladle spun in his hand, moving along his wrist. Plop! Plop! Bu Fong pressed the ladle into the wok, pounding all the beans. A piece of white gauze fell into Bu Fong's hand, wrapping the mashed beans. He squeezed them hard, squeezing out all the bean paste. At this moment, the dish Bu Fong wanted to cook had basically taken shape. The slightly viscous red bean paste was poured into the wok. The color of the red bean paste varied, appearing like flowing water. It was somewhat mesmerizing. The scarlet divine flame heated up, Bufang stir-fried the water in the bean paste. Different from that man's pure black food, Bufang's seven-colored bean paste looked more beautiful. However, those people outside the kitchen weren't interested in Bufang's bean paste at all. They were crazily roaring at that man's food. Bufang calmed his mind. He didn't feel happy about other things, nor did he feel sad about himself. He focused on cooking the food in his hands. It was a long process to stir-fry the water in the bean paste. Moreover, he needed to stir-fry it with a gentle flame, not too fast or too slow. This was somewhat similar to the cooking of the man opposite him. The man also used a gentle flame, stirring slowly until the food became sticky. After a long time, Bufang added the honey and oil juice into the stir-fried bean paste. His palm was covered with energy, and he plunged it into the wok, taking out the bean paste. Buzz, the bean paste spun in Bufang's hand, turning into a rotating seven-colored ball. It was warm, luxurious, and mesmerizing. He let the bean paste float in the air. Bufang released a cold aura, freezing the bean paste. On the other side, he began to knead the flour. The process of making noodles was too familiar for Bufang. The dough flew and turned into a ball, floating in the air, echoing the seven-colored bean paste ball. In the distance, that man had finished cooking. Rumble. He poured the food in the glass wok into the black wok on the wooden cart. Hot air was boiling above the black wok. As for him, he took out a clean white cloth and wiped his hands. Bit by bit, he wiped them carefully and carefully. In a short while, he wiped them clean. The man's dish was finished. Outside the kitchen, the exiled people had gone completely mad. They crowded at the door, rushing at the kitchen door, making it seem as if the door was about to burst open. Bufang's face was calm. He glanced at everything outside the door, his expression unchanged. He kneaded the flour, not too fast or too slow, wrapping the buns like a Buddha. That's right. This time, what Bufang was going to make was bean paste buns. Bufang's slender and fair hands were very flexible. The flour flew, wrapping the seven-colored bean paste. After kneading, it quickly turned into various shapes. There were cute bunnies, cute little sheep, and even Bufang made bean paste buns in the form of Little Hu and Xiaopi. This kind of casual cooking stunned the group of people. Many people thought that Bufang had chosen to give up and give up. Basket after basket of bean paste buns were pushed into the steamer by Bufang. Bufang was also looking forward to what would happen when these bean paste buns came out of the steamer. An unconventional dark cuisine? In that case, let me use the cute and small bean paste buns to have a head-on collision. Boom! Bufang snapped his fingers. Under the steamer, the fire rose to the sky. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.